In the exhibition hall where Roselle's diary was kept, the two machinery hive mind members suddenly heard a clatter. At the same time, they turned their heads to look at the sealed artifact made out of blocks above the glass display case. Inside the scaled-down model of the museum's first floor, there was a gray dot that was constantly flashing. "There's a lifeless object in the nearest washroom." One of the team members made a definite judgment. The other team member relaxed a little, frowned, and said in a guessing tone, "A dead leaf blown in by the wind?" "It's possible." The team member who spoke first nodded. "Let's wait till the security guards pass by, we'll get them to check and confirm the situation. Captain told us to stay here and not to leave no matter what happens, especially not alone. In the event of an urgent emergency, they could evacuate with Roselle's notebook." "All right." His companion had no objection to his suggestion. In the office area on the second floor of the museum, Klein was like a floating ghost, passing through one wall after another and flying directly above the restored study. However, he didn't fly too fast. Instead, he continued to sense the fire spark below and kept track of the distance. When the straight-line distance reached almost 30 meters, he lifted his illusory and translucent right hand and soundlessly snapped his fingers. In the washroom on the first floor, the box of matches exploded with a soft bang. Then, a scarlet flame leaped up and ignited a paper towel, a potted plant, and the wooden door. The flames didn't spread yet, but it was shocking enough. The nearby security personnel who heard the noise immediately rushed over. In the exhibition hall that was monitoring the entire situation on the first floor, the two machinery hive mind members also saw the flames in the model at the same time and subconsciously wanted to rush over there. This was not only an attempt to extinguish the fire, but they were also prepared to capture the troublemaker. But the moment they took 2 steps, they stopped, having remembered their captain's orders. "Don't leave this exhibition hall, don't leave Roselle's notebook, regardless of the situation." They looked at each other, then they looked warily at the 2 entrances to the hall before quietly taking out their own Beyonder weapons. As Beyonders of the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery, they were never lacking in equipment. At this moment, Max Livermore was patrolling the various exhibition halls on the first floor with a lantern in hand. He had also noticed the commotion and, without thinking, rushed towards the direction of the exhibition hall where Roselle's notebook was located. The priority to ensure the safety of the items was higher than capturing the intruder. Moreover, Max believed that no matter what the other party's intentions were, as long as they entered the first floor of the museum and entered any of the halls, they would be under the effect of the sealed artifact, and it wouldn't be easy to leave that easily. If there was no external help, the infiltrator would be trapped inside. Even if the intruder had a helper, it would still take them quite a bit of time to get rid of the effects. Once you enter, you will be like prey that has fallen into a trap. Max Livermore ran at top speed. After passing through many exhibition halls, he finally saw the silhouettes of his 2 companions. At that moment, Klein, who was on the second floor of the museum, had already passed through the doors and walls according to the layout in his memory. He had arrived right above the restored study. He was in no hurry to carry out any follow-up actions. Instead, he first looked down. As the stone floor was relatively thick, Klein was unable to vaguely confirm if there were any auras or emotions beneath him. He could only spread his arms wide, fall forward, and silently lie on the ground. His illusory and transparent figure quickly faded into the ground. On the crystal chandelier hanging from the ceiling on the first floor, a faintly discernible human face suddenly appeared. The strange face overlooked the exhibition hall, its eyes constantly moving, taking in the scenery of every corner in the area. There are no Beyonders or security personnel. Mumbling to himself, Klein penetrated the ceiling and descended in front of Roselle's glass-covered desk. He glanced at it, and without hesitation, he reached out with both hands to grab the bookmark in the manuscript of creativity and the bookmark which looked like child's graffiti. He was trying to prevent a powerful Beyonder, who could reconstruct the scene through magical means, from knowing that he knew which bookmark was abnormal. This was to prevent the investigator from suspecting Miss Justice who had only touched one bookmark. Augmented by Azek's copper whistle, he passed through the glass case and steadily held the 2 bookmarks, then he wrapped them within his spirit body. After finishing this step, Klein's heart calmed down, no longer having any obvious nervousness or tension. He stretched out his hands again, reaching out for the other bookmarks. Wah! 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 The loud and shrill cry of a baby suddenly reverberated within the exhibition hall. It was so illusory, as though it came from far, far away. Klein's body stiffened, freezing all of a sudden like a lake encountering extreme coldness. In his spirit body state, he appeared to have been frozen. Wah! 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 Along with the cries of the baby were fine black rifts that surrounded Klein like a discontinuous iron fence. In the blink of an eye, one of the black rifts cracked open, revealing an eyeball filled with blood strands. In the center of the eyeball was a deep pupil, and in it, countless tiny white worms were crawling and squirming. 1, 2, 3. Black rifts opened successively, and one by one, the bizarre eyeballs were exposed in midair. They stared at Klein in a cold and merciless manner. As they appeared, everything around them froze in place. Even the illusory spirits were unable to penetrate through them. It even became hard for Klein to sense the existence of the spirit world. He found it difficult to see the translucent figures that were located infinitely high. He found it hard to see the different colors, the lustrous splendors which contained various types of knowledge. Why did you only take the bookmarks? A soft but unemotional female voice entered Klein's ear. He froze on the spot and saw a tall bookcase, divided into 2 levels. The top level almost reached the ceiling, with a staircase and a passage surrounding countless books. At the top of the stairs sat a figure shrouded by the darkness. The figure's feet, which wore black leather boots, hung from the wooden stairs as they were suspended in midair. I actually didn't sense her existence at all. Is she some powerhouse from the machinery hive mind? No, she might be a high-sequence beyonder. Klein didn't answer. Instead, he narrowed his eyes. Why did you only take the bookmarks? Where did you learn to only take the bookmarks? The figure asked once more. The gentleness had a hint of sternness, and the bloodshot eyeballs surrounding him rapidly widened, as though they wanted to occupy the entire space. Before she could finish her sentence, Klein revealed a wide smile on his face. His illusory, nearly translucent figure instantly disappeared, leaving his whereabouts unknown. Even Azek's copper whistle and the 2 bookmarks which were wrapped in his spirit body had vanished. Above the gray fog, within the majestic ancient palace, Klein's figure suddenly appeared at the top of the long, mottled table. He leaned back into his chair and said with a chuckle, "Fortunately, I was prepared." The state of his spirit body wasn't part of his beyonder powers. It didn't originate from the transformation between his physical body and spirit body. This was the result of him summoning himself and responding to his ritual. And the power of this ritual came from the mysterious space above the gray fog. It stemmed from its special nature. Hence, as long as Klein succeeded, he wouldn't even need to try to escape. By just ending the summoning directly, he would be able to return to the gray fog and, from here, instantly return to his physical body in the real world. As the space above the gray fog could block the power of deities like the eternal blazing sun and the true creator, Klein believed that, without the interference of deities, the summoning wouldn't be interrupted. As long as the enemy didn't kill his spirit body or instantly knock him unconscious, Klein had the confidence to escape. This was also the reason why he didn't want to become a spirit body and still make a long trek over to the museum. The more time spent added even more variables. As the faint and dark crimson moonlight shone in from the window, the woman sitting at the top of the stairs between the bookshelves looked at the desk in silence. She looked at the spot where Klein had been. The surrounding cries of the baby and the eyeballs had disappeared one after another. After an unknown period of time, the top of the stairs suddenly became empty, as if no one had ever been there before. In the exhibition hall which housed Roselle's diary, Max Livermore said to his 2 team members, "Watch this place well. I'll go find the infiltrator. He must still be trapped somewhere on the 1st floor by the power of the sealed artifact." As he spoke, he looked at the sealed artifact, the model of the 1st floor of the museum, in a bid to find the red dot, which represented the infiltrator, and lock onto that person's location. However, no matter how he looked and counted, something didn't seem right. The number of people hadn't increased. This? Max Livermore froze where he was. 18 Kings Avenue, in a certain wealthy merchant's storage room. Klein's eyes lit up again, and the corners of his mouth curled up. He left the bookmarks and Azek's copper whistle above the gray fog, and he didn't waste time returning to his body. After extinguishing the candles and ending the ritual, Klein cleaned up the scene. He used a specially concocted medication to neutralize the smell of the holy night powder and the essential oils from the ritual. After doing all of this, he dispelled the wall of spirituality, allowing the wind to blow away the remaining traces. Next, he took out his master key, planning to go through buildings before taking a rental carriage a distance away. Using his cane to determine his direction to prevent himself from getting lost and heading back to the Royal Museum or to a particular cathedral, Klein headed off at a brisk pace, opening the walls and doors that stood in his way with the master key. After walking in a straight line for a while, he suddenly felt like he was unable to determine his position. 2 more buildings and I'll be out. If I'm no longer on Kings Avenue, I'll get a rental carriage, or I'll make another divination. I'll immediately study the card of blasphemy once I'm home. Klein quickly made up his mind. He placed the brass key which was simply shaped against the wall and gently twisted it. As the formless ripples spread out, he arrived at a neighboring building of the terraces. At this moment, his nose twitched as he smelled a strong stench of blood. The strong smell of blood. Klein frowned. He looked up and saw a lady laid out in the living room ahead of him. The woman's expression was filled with pain. There was a large wound at her abdomen, and her internal organs seemed to have disappeared. At the same time, Klein heard grunting noises. The 12th case. That devil serial murderer. The moment he saw the corpse and heard the sound, Klein's hair stood on end. He knew that he had encountered a bad situation. Within his line of sight, the living room's decorations were mostly brilliant yellow and bright. There was nothing unusual about the coffee table and sofa. Only the carpet was stained bright red with blood as it slowly soaked through. On the side of the wound on the female corpse's abdomen, which was completely empty, sat a large-sized black dog. Its mouth was half open, revealing many sharp white teeth that sent shivers. On each tooth, there were dark red marks like iron rust. This seemed to be the result of its prolonged consumption of flesh without frequent brushing. At this moment, the large black dog's teeth were still wrapped around blood-red small intestines, as well as bits and pieces of raw meat. Its head turned over, and its eyes which resembled magma reflected Klein, who was dressed as a worker, and his disguised face. Grunt. The large black dog let out a roar which sounded like it was showing dominance. It really is an animal. It's a sequence 6 devil, a devil which is about to advance. And none of the preparations that I made today were for it. These few thoughts instantly flashed through Klein's mind. Suddenly, the black dog's body expanded rapidly, turning into a 2 to 3 meter tall monster. On its back, a pair of giant bat wings slowly spread open, and beside its ears, goat horns covered in mysterious patterns grew out. Red and blue flames leaped from of its luxuriant fur as the strong smell of sulfur followed. Almost at the same time, Klein stomped on the ground. Instead of retreating, he advanced, swinging his cane as he shot out at the gigantic devil dog like a cannonball. Swing! The black devil dog quickly pounced forward. Its sharp claws created afterimages as it swiped at Klein's body. Without a sound, its claws had penetrated the figure, as if they were piercing through the air. Klein's figure became faint as it quickly turned transparent. It was just an illusion. It was an illusion created by Klein. At this moment, he had already rolled on the ground and closed in towards the oriel window. Then, with his left hand pressing down, his entire body flew into the air, directly smashing through the glass. After identifying the enemy, he made up his mind to escape. Upon seeing this, the eyes of the huge devil dog immediately lit up like magma, as if there was a raging fire inside. It opened its mouth, which emitted a putrid smell, and said a word filled with foulness, a word that came from the devil language, die. Oof. Klein's body suddenly stopped, his heart felt as if it was being tightly clenched by an invisible hand. The figure that was frozen in midair instantly became thin and dim, turning into a crudely cut paper figurine. And this paper figurine was covered with red rust. Smash. Clang. Two sounds of indistinguishable order sounded. Klein's figure appeared again, smashing through the oriel window and pouncing towards the stone-paved street. The paper figurine substitute slowly floated down as it ignited and emitted the smell of sulfur. The devil dog let out a low growl and pounced again, jumping onto the windowsill. A crimson-blue fireball flew out from its mouth, blasting in the direction of its enemy's escape route. The moment Klein landed on the ground, he immediately followed up with another roll. The crimson-blue fireball smashed to his side, but it didn't explode immediately, as if it was being affected by an invisible force, as though it was being detained. Boom! Only after Klein had scrambled a distance away did the fireball expand and explode, shattering the surrounding stone pavements. Seeing that the devil dog was about to pursue him, Klein opened his mouth, having prepared for this. He shouted at the top of his lungs, "Murder! Save me! Murder! Save me!" His voice seemed to be augmented with special effects. It echoed far and wide through the silent night, waking the residents of the entire street and sending them into the ears of the patrollers who were 2 streets away. The giant devil dog paused in its pouncing posture. After thinking for a second, it retreated back into the room and began to clean up the scene. Klein's sprinting figure also disappeared under the shouts of "Murder and save me." Inside a nearby fireplace that had long since been extinguished, the remnant charcoal suddenly reignited, and an exaggerated flame rose up. Klein seemed to be performing a magic trick as he appeared out of the flames. With a light leap, he held his cane and jumped out. Then, he used the master key to open the door, tear through walls, and quickly escaped in another direction. Phew, at a time like this, a scream without beyonder powers is much more useful than simulating gunshots. Klein sighed as he took out a bottle of amantha extract and dripped a few drops on himself. As the original race of the devil was of the dog species, he had to be wary of its scent-tracking abilities being one of its special powers. In this way, Klein continued on until he reached another cross-junction. Only then did he stop and look around. Seeing that it was relatively quiet and unaffected, he hurried to the side of the street and hired a rental carriage. It was only after the carriage had traveled a certain distance in the night when Klein finally heaved a breath of relief. He knew that the devil wouldn't catch up to him. This master key is really strange. I actually got lost and found myself at the scene of the murder. I have to be a lot more careful when using it in the future. That really was a devil transformed from an animal. Where did its potions and formulas come from? Does it have a human companion? How did it pick its target for the serial murder? What's gratifying is that after confirming this point, it will be much more difficult for it to commit crimes again, and the probability of getting caught will also greatly increase. All sorts of thoughts and questions appeared in Klein's mind as the carriage sped along the wide, deserted road which was lined with gas street lamps. Suddenly, Klein's heart skipped a beat, and an image naturally appeared in his mind. Pea vines drooped down from the sky and interweaved to form a dense forest. However, the carriage driver didn't seem to notice and continued to drive the carriage across the green vegetation. No good. Without hesitation, Klein lunged for the window, about to jump into the street. Bang! The carriage shook, and he was flung backward. At the same time, those pea vines really drooped down. Klein frowned as he attempted to use flame controlling to ignite the carriage, but no sound came from his fingers. At this moment, the surroundings had become abnormally quiet. Even the sounds of the horses' hooves trampling and the rapid rumbling of the wheels over the green vegetation had disappeared. Klein tried his best to calm himself down as he looked out the window and saw that the carriage had been driven into the air, following the road of pea vines. No, this isn't Backland. He narrowed his eyes. At this moment, the carriage stopped. Outside the window, the pea vines had formed a hammock in the air. A pair of feet in black leather boots drooped down, and a gentle but emotionless voice entered Klein's ears. "What were you doing?" It's that woman inside the museum. She's suspected to be a high-sequence beyonder. She doesn't seem to recognize me. After all, I had disguised myself with Azek's copper whistle. She must have heard the cry for help and came over to check. Klein's thoughts were abnormally active at that moment. He deliberately gulped and said, "I'm a private detective. Many friends and I are investigating the recent serial murders. I have a mystical item called the Master Key. It can open doors and let me pass through walls, but it will cause the holder to get lost." It was during this process that I ran into the scene of the crime. Because I wasn't the murderer's opponent, I could only shout for help while running. Everything I said was the truth. Klein silently added in his heart. After he finished speaking, there was temporarily no response from the outside. However, he felt that a gaze had penetrated the carriage, passed through the obstructions, and was directly inspecting the items on his body. Fortunately, I left Azek's copper whistle and the bookmarks above the gray fog just in case. At that moment, Klein was very glad. Caution and carefulness were indeed useful. After the indescribable and torturous silence, the gentle but emotionless female voice finally sounded again. "That key has a certain curse. It must not be used unless absolutely necessary." As soon as she finished her sentence, the surroundings changed completely. Everything, the pea vines, the road through the forest, the road to the sky, had all disappeared. The carriage continued on the streets, driving between the elegant iron-black gas street lamps. Klein remained on tenterhooks until the carriage arrived near East Borough, where he paid the fare of 8 soldi. Under normal circumstances, a rental carriage wouldn't enter any of East Borough streets because it was likely to be robbed. In one of the rooms on Black Palm Street, Klein changed his clothes and went straight to sleep. He didn't attempt to return to Minsk Street before midnight. The 12th murder had just occurred, and it would only serve to make Backlund's situation tenser. He didn't immediately go above the gray fog to study the secret of the bookmark. He acted just as he had described himself to the mysterious woman. He was a low-sequence beyonder, a private investigator with some beyonder powers. Tonight's show was filled with surprises. It was rather thrilling. All I did was steal something. Yes, most of the problems can be blamed on the master key. Klein made a self-deprecating comment and quickly fell asleep. The next morning, he breathed in the choking smog as he slowly strolled home and picked up the newspapers and letters from his mailbox. After opening the door, he casually flipped open the newspaper to take a look and found that the headline was as he had expected, "The 12th case. The devil has appeared again." The police have declared that they have locked onto the murderer. As for the theft of the objects in the Royal Museum, it was only mentioned in an inconspicuous location. In fact, the article didn't even mention what the stolen object was. The unstamped letter that came with the newspaper was a water bill that Klein had to pay for himself. He glanced at it and casually threw it on the coffee table. He then returned to the second floor to heat up water for a bath. He waited until the water vapor filled the bathroom before he seized the opportunity to take 4 steps counterclockwise to enter the space above the gray fog. Inside the immutable ancient palace, Klein sat down and picked up the bookmark that depicted the figure of Emperor Roselle. "It really wasn't easy getting you." He gently caressed the surface of the cardboard and silently sighed. The bookmark was, on the surface, nothing special. Roselle's portraits had been placed everywhere around the exhibition hall, and the image depicted was from the period when he was middle-aged. Klein kept flipping the bookmark repeatedly, in scrutiny, and found a tiny puncture, thereby confirming that this was the bookmark which Miss Justice had verified. He tried to spread his spirituality, and he slowly injected it inside. However, just like with ordinary objects, his spirituality only flowed and failed to permeate it, nor did it cause any abnormal changes. That's right, Roselle had the intention of finding someone who was fated, so he wouldn't specifically restrict it to beyonders. Klein thought for a moment, then said softly in Fasak, "Pirate King." The bookmark still didn't respond. He tried the words in ancient Fasak, Intis, Loan, and other languages again, but the result was the same. As for Jotun, Elvish, Dragonese, and other languages from the mysticism domain, Klein could only try them out of hope since they was overly restrictive and unlikely to be the language used. Without a doubt, he failed. Immediately following that, Klein used Faceac again as he translated One Piece. The bookmark lay quietly on his palm, showing no sign of abnormality. Klein tried the steps he did from before, using different languages again, but he was constantly met with failure. It seems that my initial guess was wrong. The young Roselle might have used the meme of Pirate King to make a joke, but he might not necessarily do that when he was older. People will ultimately grow old and change. Klein reflected over his mistake as he tapped the edge of the long, mottled table with his finger, trying hard to infer from the bits of information that the diary had provided to unlock the bookmark. After a while, he took out a pen and paper, and he wrote down his thought process so as to avoid any confusion or contradictions. While doing this, Roselle was definitely maniacal and in despair. It also clearly showcases his warped humor. The fated ones will receive it as proof considering how it doesn't suit the world's lingo at present. Therefore, I can be certain that he really wanted someone to discover the uniqueness of the cards of blasphemy by chance. In that case, the unlocking method can't be too unimaginable, or something that will often appear in daily life. What Roselle required was a coincidence. For example, when someone holds the worthless bookmark and randomly says a specific word, then, congratulations, you have obtained a fortuitous opportunity. Yes, this is very in line with his warped humor. Going by this logical train of thought, different cards of blasphemy should have different unlocking incantations. Using a single term to unlock all the cards of blasphemy clearly isn't congruent with Roselle's style. What is the incantation for unlocking this card? Well, the first things that can be ruled out are the words that are commonly used, words that are said all the time. Also, when creating the cards of blasphemy, Roselle's state was in despair, maniacal, unwilling to part with it, reminiscent, struggling, and angry. I can try to immerse myself in that state of mind and imagine myself to be Roselle at that point in time. I can imagine what kind of incantation I would have used. Klein stopped writing and began acting as Roselle in a bid to find some inspiration. He first tried out vulgarities in different languages, including ancient Faceac, as well as terms pertaining to hope, but unfortunately, was rewarded with failure. Immediately after, he tried to figure out what would be the last thing a desperate powerhouse would be reluctant to part. His wife, Matilda? Such a licentious guy shouldn't have such deep feelings for his first wife. His children? The eldest daughter, Bernadette, the eldest son, Seal, and the second son, Bornova. According to the diary, the person he can't get over the most was his daughter, Bernadette, who might become an important figure in the mysterious world. Klein paused, took a breath, and prepared to try again. Bernadette, he said in the Intis language. The bookmark didn't respond. Klein switched to the languages of Lone, Highlander, and Faceac, but still failed to achieve the desired results. He sighed and said with a deep voice which corresponded to ancient Faceac, Bernadette. This name echoed in the empty and quiet gray fog like it was nothing special. Just as Klein was about to search for new inspiration, he suddenly felt the bookmark in his hand sink. It immediately turned into an invisible whirlpool which wildly absorbed Klein's mental energies. For an ordinary person, this was a huge burden, but for a Sequence 7 magician, it wasn't especially draining. Klein easily survived this hurdle and couldn't conceal his joy as he looked at the object in his palm. A bright light emitted, bit by bit, from the bookmark, and the image of Emperor Roselle on the outside was being replaced by an entirely new image. He was sitting on an ancient stone throne as he wore a black crown embedded with various precious stones on his head. He wore pitch-black armor, and a cape of the same color was draped over his body. He held a scepter, and he looked forward with cold, aloof eyes. On the upper left corner of the bookmark, there was a line of text condensed from the bright radiance of stars. Sequence 0, Dark Emperor. Sequence 0. Indeed, the secrets of the gods are hidden within. The Dark Emperor is actually Sequence 0. Klein thought with a smile, half sighing and half surprised. Soon after, the bookmark became three-dimensional, like a miniature book. The book moved without the wind, revealing a Roselle in a white hood. Beside it was a corresponding description in ancient Fasak. Sequence 9, Lawyer. Good at discovering and using loopholes in the rules and the weaknesses of their opponents. Possesses excellent eloquence and reasoning skills. Potion formula. Klein glanced at the formula ingredients but didn't look carefully. He reached out his hand and touched it, making the book flip to the next page. Sequence 8, Barbarian. Problems that cannot be solved by the law will be solved by force. This is also one of the rules. The Beyonders at this sequence have a high resistance to psychological influences. Potion formula. As Klein touched it, the book conjured from the card of blasphemy flipped through one page at a time. Sequence 7, Briber. Sequence 6, Baron of Corruption. Sequence 5, Mentor of Confusion. Sequence 4, Count of the Fallen. Sequence 3, Frenzied Mage. Sequence 2, Duke of Entropy. Sequence 1, Prince of Disorder. Sequence 0, Dark Emperor. After skimming through the book, Klein couldn't help but sigh. This really hides the profound secrets of becoming a god. It's no wonder all of the high-sequence Beyonders who tread this pathway will attempt to establish their own kingdoms, and walk the lands. It's because the ritual of becoming a god requires it. To advance from Sequence 1, the Prince of Disorder, to Dark Emperor, the necessary ritual requires one to possess their own country, linking their name to the title of Emperor, making it common knowledge among the populace. Furthermore, one needed to establish a set of strict and complicated rules that defied normality, including architectural styles. Then, they would spur on their citizens to secretly establish 9 mausoleums that were similar to pyramids. After which, they would enter one of the mausoleums. With a large majority of the citizens who would be scattered across different cities in corresponding sacrificial rituals involved, the Prince of Disorder would imbibe the Sequence 0 potion. Once the advancement was successful, the Dark Emperor wouldn't truly die until all the 9 secret mausoleums were destroyed. Even if he was annihilated, he would still be able to awaken and return from one of the mausoleums. What was even more terrifying was that even if the deity was successfully killed and all 9 mausoleums destroyed, as long as a certain amount of the order set up by that deity remained, it was still possible for him to mysteriously revive. It appeared to be a loophole against death. The best way to completely obliterate him was for a new Dark Emperor to appear. This is a deity. Mortals cannot fight against deities, same for angels. Those who have yet to become deities will never be able to fathom the power of deities. Roselle exposited with deep implications at the end. In addition, Klein also knew one thing: once there was a true god with a Sequence 0, it was impossible for a Sequence 1 Beyonder to appear. If there was no Sequence 0, then, in the same way, there would be at most 3 Sequence 1 Beyonders. This was a result of the law of Beyonder characteristics: indestructibility and conservation. According to the Dark Emperor card of blasphemy's description of the 10 sequences, Klein could clearly see that the greatest feature of this pathway was the shadow of it gradually evolving into order. Roselle also mentioned that if one had that card of blasphemy in hand after advancing to a high sequence Beyonder, the card would have a subtle reaction to the Beyonder ingredients that the person needed. Of course, it was limited to high sequence Beyonders of the Dark Emperor pathway. What a pity, this is of no use to me. Klein looked at the card of blasphemy thinned down again, turning back into a poker card. However, it was no longer in disguise. On the surface, it depicted Roselle sitting on a stone throne, Sequence 0 Dark Emperor. Klein remained silent for a few seconds before he sighed silently. This card's biggest use to me is to exchange the formulas for the items I need. There's also some information about deities and sequences. Apart from that, there's almost no other use for it. At the very least, as the leader of the Tarot Club and as the Fool, I will no longer be an empty shell. I now hold one path of the divine, and it's not like I can't produce a high sequence Beyonder formula anymore. Yes. I remember that at the Beyonder gathering organized by old Mr. Eye of Wisdom, the lady who is suspected to have an artisan backing her has been always seeking to purchase the potion formula of Barbarian. As his mind whirled, Klein took another look at the Roselle portrait on the Dark Emperor card and couldn't help laughing. He has made every sequence in his own image. What a narcissist. I'm suddenly very curious what the card of blasphemy for the demoness pathway would look like. Hee. Reining in his thoughts, Klein destroyed the other bookmark he had casually picked up and discovered that it was just an ordinary bookmark. After doing all of this, he changed his seating posture and leaned back into his chair. He responded to Miss Justice's plea from last night and said calmly, that was a card of blasphemy made by Roselle. Empress Burrow, Count Hall's home, dining room. As per usual tradition, Audrey was saying grace with her father, mother, and elder brother before dinner. Praise the goddess. She tapped her chest in 4 spots in a clockwise manner to end the prayer. However, before she finished speaking, her vision was covered by a thick gray fog. A distant figure that seemed to be looking down at everyone and everything opened his mouth with dominance. That was a card of blasphemy made by Roselle. Mr. Fool. Card of blasphemy? Audrey, who finally received a response, was joyful at first, but then she fell into a daze. She couldn't understand what the so-called card of blasphemy referred to. However, she quickly made a guess. She had always known that Emperor Roselle had made a secret deck of cards representing some unknown force which had 22 cards in total. It was believed to have been referenced from tarot cards. Furthermore, she had also heard from the Hanged Man that the secret to the deck of cards was that they hid the paths of the divine, the path to becoming a god. So it's called a card of blasphemy. It corresponds to the blasphemy slate. This is definitely a treasure of the highest level in the mysterious world. The paths of the divine. It's no wonder that Mr. Fool's adorer had to ask for help. He wanted to ensure that the card was the real one before taking action. It was to prevent a mistake from happening. Instead of getting the right target, it might end up informing the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery that a particular bookmark hides a card of blasphemy. I wonder if he succeeded. The Beyonders from the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery haven't come to make any routine inquiries. Perhaps, he's still making plans. As her body trembled faintly, Audrey once again saw a figure praying inside the thick fog, an extremely blurry figure. He was saying respectfully, "The great fool, please convey my gratitude to the authenticator. This allowed my operation to go smoothly. For that, I'm willing to raise the reward to £3,000 which can be deducted from the £5,000 that haven't been paid yet. This is the share that the other party deserves." He succeeded? He succeeded just like that? But when I looked at the front pages of those newspapers, there was no news of the theft at the exhibition. It was all news of the 12th victim of the serial murder. Raising the reward to £3,000 implies that Mr. Fool's adorer had indeed succeeded in retrieving the bookmark containing the card of blasphemy without anyone noticing. How cool. Although the term invented by Emperor Roselle may not be elegant, reserved, or in line with my identity as a noble identity, it's the only impression that I feel right now. Our tarot club now has a complete path of the divine in its control. It should be a complete one, right? I wonder which one it is. But regardless, this represents the path to becoming a god. Under the glory of Mr. Fool, we will one day become the most powerful hidden faction in the world. I wonder if the other bookmarks hide cards of blasphemy. Audrey controlled her excitement as she felt longing and pride. She allowed the dining maid to help her spread out a napkin before her gaze shifted to Count Hall, who habitually read the newspapers while having breakfast. "Father, is there anything worth paying attention to today?" Count Hall sighed and said, "That devil has killed another innocent person. It's the 12th case. She's a fashion designer who had just become famous. She had only been a street girl a few times due to her desperate need for money, but she ended up encountering such a terrible situation. Thankfully, there was an eyewitness. The person witnessed the devil at the crime scene. He was really scared out of his wits. He constantly shouted on the streets, 'Murder and save me.' I have to say that his cries for help did bring acceptable results. The devil didn't chase after him. As a result, the police have locked onto the suspect and are hunting him down." Audrey drew the crimson moon on her chest once again and said, "May their operation succeed." "Father, from what you just said, it sure was a horrible but funny scene. I hope that eyewitness won't have nightmares because of it. And on the same night, Mr. Fool's adorer took one of the cards of blasphemy from the heavily protected museum without alerting anyone. Audrey added wistfully in her mind and filled in some of the details herself. Royal Museum, in the restored study. Are you sure that only 2 bookmarks were stolen? The Machinery Hivemind Squad's Captain Max Livermore asked his team members. As he spoke, he stole a glance at the important figure standing in front of the desk with his back facing him. It was an old man wearing a white clerical robe and a clerical cap. He was the head of the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery for the Backlund Diocese. He was a member of the Divine Council, Archbishop Hormick Haydn. This important figure wasn't only a clergyman, but he was also a very famous scientist, a distinguished professor of physics at Backlund University. Yes, only 2 bookmarks were stolen, the team member being questioned answered with certainty. Max nodded slightly and looked at Hormick Haydn. After some thought, he deliberated and asked, Your Excellency, after the closing of the museum yesterday evening, some aristocratic children came to visit. They had touched parts of the exhibited items, including one of the 2 bookmarks that were stolen. Do I need to get them to cooperate with the investigation? I know about that. Hormick's hands naturally drooped down as he turned around and said in a calm tone, I've already confirmed that those aristocratic children are not related to the thief who stole the bookmarks, so there's no need to get them to cooperate with the investigation. Yes, Your Excellency. Max himself didn't think there was anything wrong with the aristocratic children, not to mention that Archbishop Haydn had enough mysticism knowledge and beyonder techniques to confirm it. Hormick's gentle and benevolent face didn't show the slightest trace of anger. He looked around and said, There was more than one person here last night, at least 2 of them. They were divided into 2 opposing groups. One of them might even be of a higher sequence than me, while the other had somehow escaped mysteriously. Although I'm unable to reconstruct the entire scene, there are still some things that I can see. This matter is more complicated than we thought. At this point, he sighed. I also know why they wanted to steal the bookmarks. We've been tricked by Roselle for more than 150 years. Giving up £3,000 sure does hurts. I've saved up for so long and yet, I have less than £1,000. However, the card of blasphemy is a priceless treasure that cannot be exchanged, even with money. The contribution Miss Justice had made in this matter is definitely worth the price. Thankfully, I could deduct it from what she owes me, lightening my burden. If I ever meet Mr. Azek in the future, I'll pay him the £15,000 that belong to the adorer with a high sequence beyonder formula. I wonder what the other cards of blasphemy were disguised to look like. According to the personality of the Emperor, they should all be rather surprising. After Klein finished his reply and looked out the palace at the sea of grey fog, he silently sighed. As a precaution, he temporarily left his Dark Emperor card above the grey fog, on the surface of the long bronze table facing the seat of the Fool. He did so for Azek's copper whistle as well. When he returned to the real world, he held a ritual again and summoned himself to throw the Master Key, a sealed artifact which was an amalgamation of getting lost and having bad luck, above the grey fog. Although it didn't seem to have huge negative effects, it was enough to cause one to encounter life-threatening situations. He planned not to use it unless necessary. The Master Key is just a relic of an unlucky fellow who had just advanced to Sequence 9. Yet, it has a negative influence that even a mid-sequence beyonder is unable to weaken. It seems like there's an additional factor in the reason why the apprentice lost control, which led to something abnormal. Now that I think about it, my previous decision was correct. To explore 32, Verdi Street south of the bridge, I need to be careful and be prepared. Yes, I need to be aware of something. A sealed artifact's effects might not be completely related to the owner's sequence. I have to consider multiple factors, such as whether or not it has been contaminated by an evil god. Klein took a bath with the water that had already turned cold before walking out of the bathroom, refreshed. He went downstairs to enjoy the corn pancakes he had bought on his way back. They were local delights of the Potter Klein's Highlands, crispy, fragrant, and sweet. After he had eaten his fill, He went through his experiences from last night to see if he had left any clues behind. Even with the master key, if I'm not a beyonder, it's impossible for me to escape from the hands of a devil. Back then, the mysterious and powerful lady must have determined that I wasn't an ordinary private detective. I also didn't have any intention of hiding that point. By not capturing me, this implies that she's either an official beyonder who is friendly to wild beyonders, or she's not a member of the three churches or the military. Yes, I'm more inclined with the latter point. The former point would most likely have her confiscate the master key. Sigh, back then, I was almost on the brink of despair. I thought I would be detained in the underground prison of the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery like ordinary beyonders. I even began considering my prison break. Who would have known that she would just leave? Which organization is she from? Or is she wild? No, for wild beyonders to reach her level of power, they must have an organization of their own. That devil dog would definitely use its beyonder powers to erase clues related to itself, and that naturally includes me. In the field of mysticism, there is no way to separate them, and that lady probably can't be exposed as well. From the looks of it, the clues that I left behind while escaping had most likely have been interfered with. As for what happened in the museum, they will be searching for a special spirit body, a strange existence, and what has that got to do with me, Sherlock Moriarty? Klein mocked himself as his heart grew calmer. Of course, he had dared to return home because he had divined it in advance. It was just like he was unafraid that the museum contained traps that he found completely unsolvable. Phew, this matter has come to an end. What should I do today? Practice my beyonder powers and go to the Quelag Club to scrounge a meal in passing? Well, I don't know if the Nighthawks and mandated punishers have identified the murderer or not. Why don't I write another letter to Isengard Stanton and give myself a hint? As his thoughts raced, Klein heard someone from outside approach before leaving. Another letter? He opened the door in puzzlement, and indeed, he saw a letter lying in his mailbox. The letter was from Isengard Stanton. When he returned to the living room, Klein picked up a letter opener and opened the envelope before taking out Isengard Stanton's letter. The famous detective wrote, "Your idea has greatly helped us. Please allow me to thank you here first. After receiving your letter, we immediately organized some people to sweep through crucial areas. As expected, we found some clues, and quite a few stray animals that had frequently appeared and were remembered by the residents had disappeared. In the process, we also noticed an interesting thing. For years ago, in the serial murder case, yes, the targets were single prostitutes with a child. Quite a few people living near the scene of the crime had mentioned that although the most suspicious teenager was eccentric and vicious, he was quite fond of animals, especially a large black dog. After the boy died in the gang firefight, the people who lived around him never saw the dog again. I'm curious. Who is its current owner? Was it the murderer of some unsolved serial murder case from even further back? The above facts have all been proven to be true at the scene of the 12th murder case, and it has played a key role in giving the police a preliminary idea of the suspect. If all goes well, and the culprit is arrested, we will be able to get the majority of the reward money. My friend, I clearly remember your contribution. I will not forget your share. Isengard Stanton seems to suspect that I knew the truth about the devil, so he had deliberately hinted at something? Klein put down the letter and mumbled silently. However, this letter also made him feel relieved. The official beyonders weren't looking for the wrong person. If the gigantic devil dog didn't receive any additional help, then it was only a matter of time before it was caught and killed. As for Isengard Stanton's prediction that there was another master, Klein didn't have enough evidence to confirm the matter, so it could only be said that there was a certain probability. In short, my mission ends here. The job is now left to the Nighthawks, mandated punishers, and machinery hivemind squads. Klein pulled out a fresh sheet of paper, picked up a fountain pen, and replied Isengard Stanton with a letter filled with humility. He also ignored his subtle hints like a real, ordinary private detective. After cutting another paper figurine and sending the letter, Klein strolled to the public carriage stop to wait. He thought in a relaxed manner, the next thing to do is wait for the money, Leopard said he would be visiting the Roselle Memorial Exhibition for 3 days straight. I'll have to wait until Saturday before visiting to find him and make the final payment. Hopefully, the patent for the bicycle will be filed by then. Sigh, the Backland Patent Office seems to be known for its inefficiency. Klein had already made plans for the day. Since there was no beyonder gathering, resulting in him being unable to buy the appropriate items, he suddenly had a lot of free time. He didn't need to busy himself for a short period of time. In the morning, I'll go to the Quelag Club, practice my marksmanship, practice my beyonder powers, have lunch there, and then find a better circus to observe the magician's performance and see if I can get some inspiration. He took out his golden pocket watch and looked at it. He boarded the public carriage in a good mood. Hillston Borough, Quelag Club. Since Klein came by at least twice a week, the attendants remembered him and didn't require him to show his proof of membership or his Frost Constellation badge. It was Wednesday morning, and since most of the Quelag Club's members belonged to the middle class, where they still had fixed and decent jobs, it was difficult for them to visit the club unless it was Sunday, tea time, or when they took time off from work. The spacious and bright hall seemed abnormally empty. There were only a few people sitting in the corner where the coffee tables and sofas were. Glancing around, Klein spotted an acquaintance and went up to greet him. "Talum, with such terrific weather today, you should be at the turf club." The acquaintance was Talum, the aristocratic equestrian teacher who had introduced him to the club at the request of Mrs. Mary Dumont. He had once brought Klein business, the protection of Daily Observer reporter Mike Joseph on his trip to the Golden Rose for investigations. Talon looked up, touched his short brown curls, and smiled. "Oh my, it's the Honorable Great Detective. What have you been up to? I haven't seen you in a long time." "That's because you haven't been to the club for days." Klein smiled as he sat on the sofa next to Talum. "I've been helping the police with the serial murder case. Although it might not necessarily yield any results, the reward is tempting enough. Besides, establishing good relations with the police is very important for us private investigators." What I just said was bragging. "I'm just an unremarkable character who'd been summoned," he mocked himself inwardly. Among the few members sitting in the same sofa area behind them, a man who appeared to be a stockbroker initiated a discussion on the latest Western Railway shares and East Balham Plantation shares. Talum didn't doubt Klein's answer. He chuckled and said, "This is indeed something that will busy a great detective." After exchanging a few pleasantries, he gradually entered a pensive state. Just as Klein was about to bid him farewell and leave for the underground shooting range, Talum suddenly looked at him and said, "Mr. Moriarty, may I ask you a question?" You can charge me a consultation fee. This one is free. Also, just call me Sherlock." Klein laughed. Talum nodded gently and said hesitantly, "I have a friend who has fallen in love with someone he shouldn't have. How should he deal with such a situation?" Although I had always believed that anyone who asks a question prefaced with "I have a friend" basically means I myself, Talum's emotional colors implies that it's not for himself. He's in a dilemma, but I can't see any traces of pain. After activating his spirit vision, Klein leaned back slightly, clasped his hands, and said, "I'm sorry, but I'm not a psychiatrist or any of the experts in the newspapers or magazines who are good at solving emotional problems. My only advice is not to break the law." Heh, that was a joke. "First, we need to understand how this shouldn't have arose. Is there a feud between the family?" Talum glanced at him and said in resignation, "No, this isn't Romeo and Juliet." Upon hearing Talum's reply, Klein seemed to hear an illusory murmur in his ears. "Author, Roselle Gustave. Author, Roselle Gustave. Author, Roselle Gustave." Shaking his head, he apologized to Shakespeare and smiled. "This piece of work by Emperor Roselle is just too classic. When it comes to love that shouldn't be, I can't help but think of it. Then why shouldn't they be together?" Talum fell silent for a few seconds before saying, "I have to keep it confidential." "I'm sorry, just pretend I didn't ask." "Confidential? That must be someone with certain standing. In love with someone of the same sex? In love with someone who is related by blood?" Klein held back his curiosity and said with his hands spread out, "Then I can only give you one more suggestion. Read bestsellers about passionate love like Stormwind Mountain Villa and Love and Jealousy." Talon quivered his lips a few times, sighed, and said, "Sigh, that can only be used as the last resort. In my opinion, the feelings present in those best-selling novels simply don't seem to occur among normal people." "I think so too," Klein echoed in full agreement. After exchanging a smile with Talon, he got up and went to the underground shooting range to practice his shooting and beyonder powers. When it was almost noon, he returned to the first floor and went straight to the buffet cafeteria. He had noticed earlier that the cuisine that was in limited supply today was red wine fried foie gras, paired with sliced apples and bread soaked in butter. After taking his food, Klein carried his tray to the table where Talon was sitting. At that moment, there was another acquaintance of his, who, by the same token, had recommended his membership. He was the surgeon, Aaron Ceres. Before he could sit down after setting the tray down, Klein noticed a crutch leaning against the chair of the famous surgeon. "Aaron, what's wrong?" he asked with concern. The tall and thin man wore a pair of gold-rimmed glasses and had a cold appearance. He lightly patted his right leg and said, "No, don't mention it. It's really bad luck. I fell down the stairs and suffered rather serious fractures, so I could only fix it with a plaster." "You really were unlucky." Klein sighed in agreement, cut a piece of foie gras, dipped it in sauce, and put it in his mouth. The fragrance that was emitted the moment they melted in his mouth stimulated all of his taste buds. "I've been out of luck for a long time." Aaron nudged his spectacle frames and rubbed his temples in passing. He then looked at Klein, then at Talon before asking hesitantly, "Mr. Moriarty, do you?" "What?" Klein looked up. Aaron lowered his voice. "You're a famous detective. You should know a lot of people, right?" "It's quite all right." Klein didn't understand what Aaron was up to as he answered perfunctorily. Aaron looked at Talon again and took a deep breath. "Do you know anyone who's like a village witch doctor?" "No, I mean, some of the more capable fortune-tellers or mysticism enthusiasts. I feel that my recent string of bad luck is too abnormal. I know it's likely to be a fake or a scam, but there's no other way of shirking my bad luck. I've tried to go to church, praying, donating, attending mass, but it didn't work at all. Capable fortune-teller and mysticism enthusiast. You seem to be talking about me." Klein pondered and said, "Aaron, tell us in detail about what happened to you." By his side, Talon nodded as well. "Don't worry, I may be a believer of the Lord, but I don't reject things regarding mysticism." Aaron sighed in distress. "There are a lot of things. For example, making mistakes at the operating table. Encountering an accident on the steam locomotive. I found that my house had been burgled when I returned home. When I went to the hospital, I ended up falling down the stairs. Do you think someone has cursed me?" "Yes, I've heard Aaron mention something like this before." Klein frowned slightly. As a former Nighthawk, it was easy for him to associate this description with a sealed artifact, misfortune cloth puppet. Could it be a similar item? He activated his spirit vision and asked seriously, "Aaron, think back carefully. Before those unfortunate events began happening, one after another, did you or your family, yes, your family, encounter any unfortunate events?" Klein had wanted to ask if Aaron or his family had brought home anything which was relatively more unusual, such as a slightly dirty rag doll, before the unlucky events befell him. But as soon as the words reached his mouth, he suddenly felt that it was too direct and could easily expose the fact that he knew a lot about mysticism. Although this could be explained away by the fact that he was experienced and knowledgeable, there was no need for him to take the risk. Instead, he took a more roundabout approach and asked Dr. Aaron if his family had suffered the same ill luck. Upon hearing his question, Aaron Ceres carefully recalled and said, "No, except for the steam locomotive accident that occurred to them as well, they were the same as before. Most of the time, they didn't experience anything especially lucky or unlucky. The rest can be said to be of both types, so they can't be considered especially unlucky." "That's not right." If it was an item that needs to be sealed like the misfortune cloth puppet, it would definitely affect people within a certain range. Could it be that Aaron has dripped his blood on it, and the two of them have established a firm connection? In Klein's spirit vision, Aaron's aura and mood matched his physical and mental state, and there was nothing special about him. He asked after some thought, "Is there any colleague at the hospital that is as unlucky as you?" "No, so I think I must have been cursed by someone." Aaron pulled at his bow tie, looking anxious and uneasy. Under Talam's curious gaze, Klein thought for a moment and said, "Before you became unlucky, did you encounter any relatively stranger matters, such as cutting yourself?" In folklore, blood is the powerful medium through which curses can be formed. After I suspected that I was cursed, I have confirmed this point. "I have not lost any blood in the past 3 months, Aaron replied with a heavy mood as he held his knife and fork. "That's a little strange. I can't perform a more complicated divination in front of him." Klein asked again, "Then, were there other strange matters?" "Aaron, think back carefully. This kind of matter can't happen without a reason. Have you offended anyone recently? Or have you become an obstacle towards others?" Talam echoed with concern. Aaron looked down at the food on the plate and fell into deep thought. Klein didn't stay idle either. He took care of his food before it turned cold and unpleasant. By the time he started enjoying the dessert, Aaron finally raised his head and said, "I'm not a very sociable person. I don't have a good relationship with my colleagues, but it's hard to believe that they would come up with a way to curse me. Well, after your reminder, I do remember something. It might be related to mysticism." "What is it?" Klein and Talam's spirits were lifted at the same time. "Before my continuous bad luck streak, I was in charge of a patient, a child who wasn't even 10 years old. He was very pitiful. Due to some complications, I had to amputate his left leg." Aaron nudged his glasses and recalled. "I just became a father not long ago, so I'm always filled with sympathy for the misfortune of a child. Every time I checked the ward, I would chat with him, encourage him, and comfort him." After a pause, Aaron's thoughts turned more fluid. "I remember that it was the day before his surgery. I specially went to his ward to look for him, and he was really upset. He was playing tarot cards, which he had brought with him when he was admitted to the hospital. His family wasn't even allowed to take them away. In order to calm him down, I began playing tarot cards with him. Back then, I drew a card. It was the reversed Wheel of Fortune. That child looked at me and said with a pure and innocent smile, 'Doctor, your luck will get worse. Doctor, your luck will get worse.'" Talam drew a breath and said, "Why do I feel that such a scene and such words make my body feel cold? Did the child die on the operating table?" Aaron shook his head. "That operation was a success. It didn't take long for him to be discharged from the hospital. He even specially thanked me. So, I've never suspected this, but now that I think back, I find that this is the only time in the past 2 months that I have come into contact with something related to mysticism. No matter what, regardless of whether it is useful or not, tarot cards are still used for divination." At some point, a brass coin had appeared in Klein's hand. It was bouncing and rolling at his fingertips, seemingly symbolizing the analysis process of a famous detective. The coin was flicked up and fell into the palm of his hand. Klein glanced at it out of the corner of his eye and asked, having ended his thinking, "What's that boy's name? Where does he live?" Aaron answered without hesitation, "His name is Wuxia. As for where he lives, I don't remember. What is your suggestion, Mr. Detective? Do you know any experts in the field of mysticism?" Klein took a sip of his black tea and said with a smile under the expectant gazes of Aaron and Talam, "My suggestion is to go to the cathedral of the deity you believe in, tell the bishop about your recent misfortune, and then ask him if he has a solution. Aaron, I remember you were a believer of, the Evernight goddess, right?" He had almost said goddess, but fortunately, he remembered his identity as a detective who believed in the god of steam and machinery. "However, my prayers to the goddess, my participation in mass, and the donation of money and items were all useless. I think I should find some capable fortune tellers." Aaron didn't agree with Detective Moriarty's suggestion. Talum echoed with a nod, yes, the deities wouldn't care if you were lucky or not. Luck is a blessing, and misfortune is a test. Friend, your faith isn't pious enough. Be careful, the Lord of the Storms might zap you with a lightning bolt. Klein looked at the two separately and laughed. This suggestion is based on very simple logic. If, and I mean if, there exists useful and effective mysticism in this world, then the ones who are best at it are definitely the 7 Orthodox churches. If not, they would have long been replaced by other forces who have mastered mysticism. If there isn't such a thing as true mysticism, then finding a fortune teller or witch doctor won't be of any help. It would be better to see if there's a solution to this problem with the help of a relatively higher-ranking bishop. Aaron carefully analyzed the situation and finally nodded. That makes sense. Perhaps I will need the bishop's help to pass on the message to the goddess to protect me. No, accurately speaking, with the bishop passing on the message, the Nighthawks would be able to notice the abnormality on you. Klein retorted inwardly. He had no intention of helping Aaron himself, because to solve the problem regarding luck, aside from finding the root cause of everything, he would have to set up particular rituals. Ignoring the fact that Klein didn't know any real luck enhancement rituals, and even if he did, he would be exposing his beyonder powers to someone he was unfamiliar with, which would increase the risk for no reason. Since I can get the Nighthawks to take up the role of helping you, there's no need for me to do it myself. I just don't know if the problem came from that boy or the tarot cards in his hands. If it's the latter, then it might be a suitable sealed artifact for me. Klein shook his head, suppressing his greed and emotions. At this moment, Aaron had already made up his mind. He looked at Klein and grinned. Thank you, Mr. Moriarty. Although you don't know mysticism, you relied on strict logic to provide the best suggestion. Yes, I don't know mysticism. Klein smiled. Just call me Sherlock, Aaron. Yes, ever since I've stopped being a Nighthawk, the composition of my mysticism knowledge has become stranger and stranger. On the one hand, I've grasped quite a few secrets which are related to high sequences and deities, and on the other hand, I only understand the more basic ritualistic magic. Among the more complicated ones, I only know the sacrificial rites and bestowment rituals. As for charms, all I know are those 3. Klein sighed to himself, feeling an urgent need for a more comprehensive and in-depth book of mysticism. As for the knowledge required to separate a beyonder characteristic from the spiritual corruption of an evil god, he had no clues whatsoever at the moment. After a short afternoon nap at the club, Klein rode in a public carriage to the Rice Circus near the Tussock River in Sherwood Borough. Today wasn't a holiday nor was it a weekend. There weren't many visitors at the circus, and the clowns that were responsible for entertaining and amusing the visitors all seemed listless. Passing between the divination lodge and the tents that sold pies, pancakes, fruit pies, and alcoholic beverages, Klein walked along the edge of the circus and found a small theater. On the blackboard at the entrance, it read, non-holiday and weekends, 4 performances a day, 1 hour per performance. The first performance in the afternoon was at 2 o'clock. It had just begun. After buying his ticket, Klein entered the theater and heard cheers. At this moment, a beast trainer was on stage, holding a whip and ordering a black bear to perform in a charmingly naive manner. Next to him lay a tiger, with crisscrossed yellow-black stripes, and a seated dark and curly-haired baboon. Pa! The black bear rolled awkwardly as the trainer whipped it. I say, this guy wanted to give you a slap just a moment ago. In the front row of the rows of seats, someone suddenly shouted loudly, which immediately attracted the laughter of a handful in the audience. They thought it was a new way for the circus to amuse them. However, Klein didn't think so, for he noticed that the color of the trainer's emotions leaned toward anger and annoyance. He smiled and went to sit in the first row, watching the performance on the stage so as to not waste the price he paid for the tickets. At that moment, the person who had just spoken shouted again, that tiger wants to bite your neck off, that curly-haired baboon wants to use you as a cushion. Amidst the laughter of the audience, the beast trainer's actions clearly stiffened. This? Even though those words sound like they're causing trouble, why do I detect a hint of a warning? Klein looked over his shoulder at the speaker in the same row and saw that he was a chubby-faced man in his 30s. This tone, this way. It's kind of familiar. Klein mumbled silently to himself. Inside the small theater of the Rice Circus. As long as something felt familiar, there was no problem for a seer to recall it. Klein nudged his gold-rimmed glasses up on his nose, leaned back, and murmured something almost soundlessly. Soon after, he pretended to close his eyes to rest for more than 10 seconds. In reality, he had used the help of cogitation to quickly fall asleep and be reminded through his dream. It was a rather dim room, with only one candle flickering on the coffee table. The people sitting around it were all wearing black hooded robes and iron masks that covered only half their faces. Deliberately massaging his glabella, Klein opened his eyes and continued watching the beast-taming performance. He had interpreted the revelation and knew the source of the familiarity. The scene in the dream was of the Beyonder gathering organized by old Mr. Eye of Wisdom. There was also an apothecary with a chubby face who enjoyed using sarcasm as a warning. Although he was clearly a kind-hearted fellow, he always gave others the feeling that he deserved a beating. Could it be that apothecary? That shouldn't be the case. When did he learn beast taming? According to the confidential records of the Nighthawks, an apothecary doesn't have spirit vision like those of the seer pathway who were able to distinguish emotional colors in detail. Well, when it comes to the color of auras, they're actually quite good at it. Klein's thoughts slowly dispersed without affecting his appreciation of the performance on stage. In his spirit vision, the emotional colors of the black bear, the tiger, and the curly-haired baboon were indeed unstable. If there was an addition level of provocation to a certain degree, they might very well rampage on the spot. This indirectly confirmed that the chubby man who had just spoken wasn't causing trouble. He seemed to be able to read the thoughts of the three animals and understand their impulses. Having received the warnings, the beast trainer's face darkened with anger, but even so, his actions were instinctively gentler. He was more careful, and the show ended without a hitch. After that, there was a simple but comedic skit. Only when it was over was it the magician's turn to perform. This magician wore a tuxedo. He wore a bow tie of the same color, as well as a large top hat. The moment he appeared, he spat out fire from his mouth, which immediately caused the audience to applaud and cheer. Such a simple trick. Klein, who had excellent eyesight and had watched quite a few magic lesson programs, understood the gist of it with just a quick glance. Next, the magician performed the classic escape act, releasing flying doves from his hat, pulling out flowers, card tricks, and so on. Klein thought he could easily see through every one of the magician's tricks, but he was surprised to discover that, at some point, he actually failed to do so because his attention had been drawn to where the magician wished it to be, causing him to ignore the key details. He clearly doesn't have any Beyonder powers, but his technique is still able to fool my eyes. The key point is grasping attention. The magician's second rule is fully divert a target's attention, thus achieving the desired effect. Klein made a guess in his mind which he wasn't sure if it was right or wrong. It needed him to act it out to receive feedback. At this moment, the magician's performance came to an end. The audience weren't stingy with their warm applause and cheers. The atmosphere in the theater reached its peak that afternoon. The third rule. A magician's performance requires the applause of the audience for his performance? Klein muttered to himself in a half-joking and half-guessing manner in silence. Shortly after 3 o'clock, he pulled the collar of his black double-breasted frock coat and left the small theater. He didn't try to come into contact with the chubby man who was suspected to be the apothecary and only secretly remembered his appearance. Soliciting him suddenly might result in extreme reactions. He took a tracked public carriage back to Minsk Street. The carriage was divided into 2 floors and each of them had a few passengers. According to his usual practice, Klein chose the spot next to the window on the first floor. The carriage proceeded and stopped from time to time. Klein, who had half closed his eyes to recall the inspiration he had just had, suddenly felt his heart palpitate. He became sober and rational. The reaction was like someone had forcibly intruded into his dream or channeled his spirit. At this moment, he clearly knew that he was no longer in the real world. As someone rich with experience, he pretended to be unconcerned. He looked around and saw that the gentleman in a tuxedo and top hat to his left was still flipping through a newspaper. There were 2 children who were being reprimanded by a vexed woman in a light blue dress for being disobedient troublemakers. Beside her, people were chewing on bread or drinking tea that they had brought with them. Everything was the same as before. However, when Klein quietly activated his spirit vision, these passengers didn't emit any of the corresponding auras or emotions. They don't have ether bodies. They're clearly talking, eating bread, and reading newspapers, but none of them have any signs of life. Is this an illusion, or did they just suddenly die and are just moving according to the inertia of their lives? Klein tried to remain calm as he looked out the window and saw carriages and pedestrians passing by. It was still an afternoon scene. However, they also have no aura colors. As the carriage moved forward rather slowly, Klein became more and more serious, not understanding what had just happened. He lowered his head and examined himself. He saw a clear spirituality luster which was completely different from the people around him. At that moment, he suddenly heard an angry roar. It didn't sound like it came from a human. Klein looked up and saw a large black dog on the street. Its sharp white teeth were stained with traces of blood and rust. It was the huge devil dog that had committed heinous crimes. The black dog quickly swelled into a tall devil. It had bat-like wings on its back and goat horns, filled with mysterious patterns, that grew from its head. It looked up at the sky and said in the devil language, "Corruption." Almost as soon as it opened its mouth, Klein confirmed that it was real, because it possessed aura and emotion colors while strong spirituality lusters were being emitted from it. Following the howls of the huge devil dog, a few illusory pedestrians exploded and turned into a black mist that filled the air, blocking his line of sight. However, Klein could vaguely see that there were quite a few real people with aura colors in midair and around him. They were using Beyonder powers which emitted spirituality lusters. What's going on? Ordinary people are illusory, but the Beyonders are real. Have the Nighthawks and mandated Punishers found the devil dog and used a sealed artifact to create a battle environment which wouldn't disturb reality? That sealed artifact is only aimed at Beyonders, and it has no effect on normal people? Thus, I, who just happened to pass by, was pulled in out of bad luck. Klein's mind raced as he roughly guessed what had happened to him. What a ridiculous disaster. Just as he was sighing with emotion, he suddenly heard a blood-curdling shriek, a blood-curdling scream, and a loud scream. The black gas that screened his vision suddenly dispersed, and the gigantic devil dog fell heavily onto the ground. Its body was divided into 2 halves, and all the light in the air converged on something, making it look like a clean, pure moon shining down on the dark environment. The gigantic devil dog tenaciously roared again, and its body suddenly exploded. Using its soul and flesh as fuel, it ignited blue and red flames that soared into the sky. However, the flames lost all of their brightness as soon as they reached midair, having been absorbed by that bright and resplendent moon-like object. It disappeared without a trace, and that huge devil dog died so simply and completely, not even leaving a speck of it behind. So powerful. As Klein was sighing, he suddenly thought of something. Would those official Beyonders discover that he, another wild Beyonder, was sitting in the carriage, different from the other illusory people in the surrounding area? His heart tightened as his scalp went numb. He pulled out a paper figurine, and with a shake, he transformed it into himself, a copy that was without any aura or emotional colors. As for him, with the help of the substitution spell, he hid in the paper figurine's shadow. At this moment, Klein heard a light snort from across the street. The snort was clearly filled with anger and indignation. Who is it? It doesn't seem like the sound an official Beyonder will make. Klein was puzzled, but he didn't dare to dispel his double and peek his head out to look. Following which, a few pairs of eyes swept across the crowd, not stopping for even a moment. When all this faded away, Klein saw that the void around him had cracked and shattered like glass. Then the feeling of reality inundated him, and he knew he was back in the real world. After removing the double, he sat back in his seat. The passengers in the carriage were doing their respective deeds, reading newspapers, chewing bread, and scolding children. It was no different from before. But in Klein's vision, they had regained their aura and their emotional colors. In addition, compared to earlier, the tracked carriage had clearly moved forward by quite a distance. It seems like in that special battle environment earlier, time and space are synchronized with reality. If that battle had continued for a long time, then the carriage would have left the area of influence, leaving me alone there. Alone there. That would be an obvious exposure. Fortunately, Backland is the capital of capitals and the land of hope. There are high-sequence beyonders from the 3 major churches residing here. Klein thought with a lingering sense of fear. He had originally thought that even if they had locked onto their target, it would still take the Nighthawks, mandated punishers, and others several days to find the Black Devil dog. Moreover, that was on the premise that the dog hadn't left Backland. That was something certain, because leaving Backland would mean stepping out of the range of the ritual, and the advancement would fail. And to the devil, the negative impact of a failed ritual would cause it, who was already struggling at the edge of bloodlust, to immediately lose control. Who would have thought that just after 1 night and half a day, the gigantic devil dog would be discovered, executed, and cleansed? Terrifying. This is Backland. This is the true power of the 3 churches. A Sequence 6 Beyonder who's just about to advance was merely exposed and had left behind the tiniest of traces. Yet, he was quickly found and killed so easily. This is a devil that can sense danger ahead of time. From the looks of it, some sealed artifact perfectly hinders this trait. In the future, I must be even more careful. Klein felt that he had learned a great lesson. At this moment, he remembered the strange snort he had heard earlier. It seemed to be the companion of that gigantic devil dog? Its master? He was actually not discovered. Perhaps the final explosion of the gigantic devil dog was secretly orchestrated by him. Of course, it's also possible that he's a member of some secret organization that is unsatisfied with the official Beyonders. Klein abruptly looked out the window on the opposite side of the carriage. All he saw were people walking past looking ordinary. They either wore tweed coats, half-top hats, or bright long skirts. He couldn't tell if there was anything wrong with them. 328 He that touches pitch shall be defiled plus, turn off reset. The wheels of the carriage pressed down on the track as the horses dragged it along. The heavy carriage steadily advanced, and soon, they were moving away from the street as though nothing had happened. With a normal expression, Klein held onto his cane and waited until the tracked public carriage passed 2 stations before he got off ahead of time. He took a large detour and slowly headed back to the place where the gigantic devil dog had been killed. He wasn't looking for its Beyonder characteristics, as it was impossible for the top experts of the church to not know about this matter. They would have definitely taken it away long ago. He also wasn't investigating the source of that slight snort. After all, with so much time having passed by, the carriages moving on the streets, and the people that were coming and going, how could there be any clues left behind? Even divination would fail to obtain an answer. Klein's purpose was to look at the subtle details that remained along the street, and to see the nature of the sealed artifact that had created the strange environment for the battle, so as to prepare for what might happen in the future. This is a magician's acting. He sighed silently as he walked under the gray sky, along the edge of the street which was marked by the gas lamps. The reason why he had to wait 2 stops before getting off and taking a detour was because he was worried that there would be an official Beyonder who would sweep the battlefield in secret. He didn't want to meet them, so he tried his best not to. Klein, who was dressed decently and holding on to a cane, took some time before he returned to the huge devil dog's place of death. However, there were no traces of its presence on the street, and the passers-by clearly didn't know that a fierce Beyonder battle had taken place here. That sealed artifact is really magical. It's even more powerful than large-scale hypnosis. Klein activated his spirit vision and slowed his footsteps, like a gentleman on an outing rather than on an errand. It took him over half an hour to complete his tour of the area, but his efforts with his spirit vision was futile. There was nothing out of the ordinary about his target area. However, Klein's spiritual perception sensed one thing: its scope and its boundaries. When I entered the block and left from another direction, I felt a subtle and illusory feeling, as if I entered a different world from another world. That is to say, the sealed artifact's scope of influence can reach at least one block, and its upper limit is temporarily unclear. Klein stood outside the target street, and nodded thoughtfully before returning. He went to a decent cafe, ordered a cup of Southville coffee, and sat down by the window. As he drank the fluid with a rich aroma, he observed the street outside, which was beginning to bustle as time passed by, hoping to see any changes. Unfortunately, what he had been looking forward to didn't happen. Of course, he wasn't without gains. At the very least, he confirmed that a magician never performed unprepared, which was one of the rules of acting. He felt that the characteristics of the subtle precipitate in his body stirred a little. In the evening, Klein stopped his observations and returned to Minsk Street in a public carriage. At this moment, the gas lamps on both sides of the road had already been lit, illuminating the slightly wet cement ground with withered leaves that fell from the trees along the road with a blue hue. Holding his cane, Klein strolled past the house of lawyer Jürgen and strolled to Unit 15. As he was walking, he suddenly thought of something. He had finished all the ingredients at home. If he went back now, he wouldn't be able to cook dinner. Should I go to the meat shop and fruit shop, or find a restaurant to fill my stomach first? Klein hesitated for a moment. He then finally decided to take a break tonight and eat something ready-made. Many of the dishes in this world were made quite simply and very quickly, so it didn't become a situation where an hour was spent cooking for 5 minutes of eating. However, there was still a certain amount of work to be done. Furthermore, he had to wash the dishes and wash the knives and forks himself. After touching his wallet, Klein turned around and walked in the direction of the area, where according to his memory, there were restaurants. Once again he passed the house of lawyer Jürgens. Standing behind the open oriel window and looking at the confused expression Detective Moriarty had, Jürgen raised his voice and said, "Mr. Moriarty, did you forget your key again? Or did you drop your key? Why is he saying again?" Klein replied with a chuckle, "No, not really." Jürgen solemnly nodded his head. "Then why don't you come to my place? You can return when it's completely dark after we have dinner." Klein hesitated for a second and smiled. "It will be my honor." When he entered, the black cat, Brody, was licking his paws in a corner. Jürgen didn't make much small talk as he stepped into the kitchen. After Klein had hung up his coat and hat and put away his black cane, he stepped into the dining room and saw that the table was already covered with food, blackened steaks and mashed potatoes of the same color. He wasn't surprised by this. This was how Mrs. Doris, lawyer Jürgen's grandmother, cooked in her old age. The food didn't look appetizing, but they were delicious. "She's a good chef." Klein sat in front of Jürgen, smiled and made some small talk. "Were you about to have dinner?" "Yes, it's a habit of mine to look at the scenery outside before my meal. It allows my thoughts to spread without boundaries." Jürgen spread out his napkin and picked up his fork and knife. Klein looked around in puzzlement and asked, "Where's Mrs. Doris?" Jürgen sighed and replied seriously, "The weather is getting colder and colder. Her chronic lung problems are back, so she has no choice but to be admitted to the hospital for a while. May God bless her." Klein drew the triangular sacred emblem of the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery on his chest unfamiliarly. Then he cut a piece of steak and forked it before stuffing it into his mouth. At that moment, he suddenly thought of a problem and hurriedly asked, "So, you were the one who prepared dinner?" "Of course. It was done a few minutes ago," Jürgen answered simply. "If it isn't the work of the great chef, Mrs. Doris, then this food." The corner of Klein's mouth twitched. He held back the fear in his heart and still bit down on the small piece of steak on his silver fork, slowly chewing on it. His brows furrowed a little as he forcefully swallowed the food. He squeezed a smile as he asked, "Why did you prepare 2 servings in advance?" "One serving was prepared to be taken to the hospital for my grandmother." Jürgen glanced up at Klein. "I'll make another one later." "So that's how it is." To be polite, Klein secretly took a deep breath and steeled himself as though prepared to do battle with the food in front of him and finish it. By the time he was finished, Jurgen still had a tiny bit left. The senior solicitor put down his fork and knife, picked up the glass beside him, took a sip of red wine, and asked without expression, "How's it? Which dish do you like the most? I know there's still a large gap between my skills and my grandmother's, but it shouldn't be too exaggerated. Mr. Lawyer, I suspect you have problems with your sense of taste besides facial myopathy. Can't you realize your standards?" Klein smiled, moved his head from left to right, and said, "The white bread isn't bad. That was bought from Dodge Bakery." Jurgen reburied his head and finished the rest of the food. After drinking the remaining wine, he thought for a moment and said, "Detective Moriarty, I want to entrust you with a simple task." "What is it?" Klein kept drinking water. "The mashed potatoes were too salty. My grandma's been in the hospital lately. I might not be able to return because of my cases. This will lead to Brody being hungry." Jurgen glanced at the black cat. "I want you to feed Brody when I'm not back, clean up his litter box, and play with him for a while. He loves to be scratched under the chin. Yes, every night at 10, if there's no light in the house and it's dark, you can come in, too solely every time, until my grandmother comes home." Klein saw the solemn and prim look on Jurgen's face. He smiled and said, "It's a simple task. The reward is quite generous. I have no reason to reject it." As he spoke, he turned to look at Brody the black cat and smiled at it. Brody slowly turned his body and faced Klein with his back. Klein's smile couldn't help but freeze on his face. After drinking his fill, Klein excused himself from Jurgen's place. He strolled back to his rented house in the completely dark streets. By this time, the people who had finished their work had already returned home and were enjoying their dinner. There were very few pedestrians on the streets and not many carriages. It was very quiet. Walking under the light of the gas lamp, Klein, who had no urgent desire to return, slowed down. So did the black shadow at his feet. When he passed by the Sammers, he saw through the oriel window that the interior was brightly lit. People were moving back and forth, and sounds of chatter and laughing could be heard. As for next door, 15, Minsk Street, it was dark and silent. With a sigh, Klein quickened his pace, took out his key, and opened the door. Before he went in, he checked the mailbox out of habit and found another letter lying inside. Who sent it? Klein took out the letter and glanced at it under the light of the street lamp. No stamps. It looks like Isengard Stanton's handwriting. He nodded slightly, went inside, closed the door, switched on the light, and opened the letter. The great Detective Isengard said in the letter, "I'm very pleased to inform you that the murderer has been found and killed on the spot. The police think that our work is worth at least half the bounty. They should be disbursing it to me this week. When that happens, I will invite you and our other friends to come over and share this bounty." Isengard received the news so quickly? He sure has a close relationship with the Backland police. Oh, it's without a stamp. That means that he got someone to deliver it directly. The Lone Kingdom's postal system isn't that efficient. How could a letter sent in the afternoon arrive in the evening? Klein sighed, put down the letter, and got ready to change into a new outfit before heading out. With the serial murders out of the way and the situation in Backland easing, he could try to do a couple things. For example, find Caspers at the Bravehearts bar and contact Maric to see if the Beyonder who could control zombies and Miss Sharron had any books regarding mysticism. If my guess is right, they should be the defectors of the Rose School of Thought. They were previously in an official organization, and they must know a lot of mysticism knowledge. And now, I have enough money to buy them. Klein touched his wallet and thought in anticipation. Backland Bridge area, Bravehearts bar. Klein pressed down the cap on his head, carefully protecting the wallet in the inside pocket of his grayish-blue worker's jacket. He walked around the customers who were surrounding the boxing ring and headed for the bar. On the way, he looked around and didn't see the black market arms dealer, Caspers Kalinin. He's either playing cards or playing billiards. Klein nodded to himself, sat down at the bar, and said to the bartender, half and half. He had seen someone drink this type of alcoholic beverage the last time, and he felt that it likely suited his palate. At least it's better than pure malt beer, Klein thought to himself. The bartender raised his head and glanced at him. Which two alcohols do you want mixed? Different choices, different prices. The typical one will do. The last time he saw someone drink it, the person had used alcohol of the worst quality. The whole glass of half and half was only worth 2.5 pence. 4.5 pence. The bartender watched as Klein arranged the brass coins on the bar and then went back to mixing. He said in passing, "You here for Casper's?" "He's not here anymore, his business has been snatched." "Huh?" Klein didn't expect such an answer. Before the bartender could reply, a man with a protruded mouth next to him laughed and said, "Yes, we've chased Casper's away." "Heh, how can a lame old man like him do such a business? If you have anything you need, feel free to come to us. Find our boss." A gang war? Klein subconsciously came up with this idea, wanting to reject the man's suggestion. However, he soon thought of another possibility. Could it be that the Rose School of Thought has deliberately sought out a gang to suppress Casper so as to force Maric and Miss Sharron to jump into a trap? Yes, it's quite possible. Casper's had been working here as a black market arms dealer for a long time. He's definitely not someone who can be chased away just like that. A while ago, because of the series of murders, the atmosphere in the whole of Backland was rather tense, and the Rose School of Thought or other hidden factions wouldn't dare to recklessly kill and use spirit mediumship on Maric and Miss Sharron, even if they found them. This would result in a lot of bloodshed, and since they obviously only have a few suspects, and are unable to confirm anyone else having a way to contact Miss Sharron and Maric for the time being. Klein swallowed the words he was about to say and asked instead, "Can I first get a quote before deciding whether to purchase?" He planned to observe the faction made up of ordinary people who had taken over Braveheart's bar's black market. If he discovered any problems, then he could use them as a favor to give to Casper's, Sharron, and Maric. In any case, Klein didn't want any conflict. He only planned on observing via normal processes, so there was no risk. Yes, the only requirement is. The man made a zipping motion with his hand in front of his protruding mouth. "No problem." As soon as Klein answered, he saw the half and half in front of him, and the copper coins had been taken away by the bartender. Without any intention of wasting it, he tipped his head and drank it. His brows gradually furrowed. "It's not what I thought it would be. The taste of the spirit is too heavy, the grape flavors are too mild." Klein put down his glass and followed the man to the third billiard room where Casper's used to stay in. When he was about to reach the door, he suddenly thought of something. "As someone who doesn't know much, even I can guess that this is a trap. I wonder if Miss Sharron and Maric, who have been hunted for so long, know about it. They definitely wouldn't appear. However, Casper's knows more than one Beyonder. He has connections with several different circles of Beyonders, and he might be able to get other helpers. That would complicate things." At that moment, the man with the protruding mouth stopped at the doorway of the billiard room, and the distracted Klein almost bumped into him. He pointed inside and said, "Don't talk nonsense later. Our boss doesn't have a good temper. Everyone in the Backland Bridge area and East Borough knows this." "All right." Klein nodded. Satisfied, the man with the protruding mouth turned and pushed open the billiard room's door. As the door opened, Klein saw a figure hanging in the air, gently swaying. It was a burly man with a full beard. There was a rope tied around his neck, a rope that was tied in a dead knot. His feet were off the ground, the tip of his tongue was protruding out, and his face was purple. He wore a contorted expression. "Boss?" The man with the protruding mouth cried out in disbelief. As soon as the tension in Backland's atmosphere disappears, someone takes action. Klein tilted his head and glanced at the subordinate, he then solemnly drew a triangular sacred emblem on his chest. "May he find peace with God. I hope his temper is cured as a result." The man with the protruded mouth didn't even hear what he said. He suddenly shouted, "Boss! Murder! Boss is dead!" Klein took 2 steps back as a result of the loud and shrill voice, and he also activated his spirit vision to take a look inside the room. There was nothing special other than the scattered billiard balls all over the place. Did a Beyonder from Casper's do it? What would the faction who planted the trap do? If there was actually such a trap. Klein quietly moved away and slunk away into the crowd when the other gang members swarmed over. He glanced at the kitchen of the Bravehearts bar and, with some thought, went over and familiarly passed through to the back door. As soon as he pushed open the not-so-heavy wooden door, Klein felt a cold wind blowing against him which caused him to shiver. And amidst the cold wind was the faint smell of blood. He listened for a moment but saw nothing. He took out his penny and flicked it up. The landing sound was cut off by the wind, and Klein looked down at the copper penny in his palm, confirming that it was heads. Putting the coin away, he carefully walked forward, heading in the direction that his spiritual perception told him to. He walked to a dark corner where there wasn't any illumination from the street lamps. The smell of blood suddenly became stronger. With the help of the weak moonlight that penetrated through the clouds, Klein almost gasped when he saw what was in front of him. The floor here was littered with bloody thighs, calves, boots, ribs, a heart, arms, eyeballs, and other human parts. On the wall hung a portion of pale red intestines. The background was a large patch of bright red with milky white markings. Seeing this, Klein felt like he was looking at a slaughterhouse specially prepared for humans. Is the murderer afraid that the Nighthawks, mandated punishers, and the others are too idle? This is so exaggerated that the police would immediately transfer the case to them. Klein muttered in his mind to resist the discomfort caused by the scene. He walked around the blood and approached the opposite wall. To his surprise, there were quite a few deep scratches. It was like a thick and sharp claw that forcefully scratched out a mark. The claw is similar to the one the devil dog had after its transformation. Could it be that there's another one? Could it not be dead yet? No, I know what's going on. Klein suddenly came to a realization. The deceased must be the Beyonder who killed the bar's gang leader. He was finished off by the faction who had set the trap. According to Little Sun's description, I've always suspected that the faction is the Rose school of thought because they grasped the prisoner pathway, which is also the mutant pathway. And one type of mutant was the werewolf. This was in line with the traces of the crime scene before him. It also indirectly proves that Miss Sharron and Maric are defectors of the Rose school of thought. Klein calmly retreated out of the scene, one step at a time. During this process, he confirmed that there weren't any Beyonder characteristics present. Of course, it was possible that it hadn't appeared yet. Then he turned and walked towards another street, intending to get someone to inform the police, lest such a scene frighten the commoners and make them suspect that Backland had been infiltrated by some ferocious beast. Because he didn't want to get into trouble over greed, Klein didn't wait for the possibility of a Beyonder characteristic appearing. Just as he reached the end of the alley, he suddenly saw a brown carriage slowly approaching in the night. The carriage didn't continue to move forward like the other carriages. Instead, it stopped right in front of Klein. Klein narrowed his eyes as he prepared to do battle. However, whether it was his spirituality intuition as a seer or the battle sense of a clown, neither of them gave him a warning. At this moment, the window of the carriage was opened, revealing a pale face which wore a hint of madness to it. Its brown eyes seemed to conceal deep malice. Maric. Klein recognized him. It was Maric, Miss Sharron's companion who controlled zombies. He was only wearing a white shirt and a black vest, and he didn't seem to be afraid of the cold at all. He gestured for Klein to board the carriage. For a moment Klein hesitated, wanting to use his spirit pendulum to divine right there on the spot. At this moment, a figure appeared behind Maric. She wore a complex black regal dress and a small, soft hat. It was the blonde Miss Sharron with blue eyes. She can easily do me harm if she wants to. She can directly come out from the wall behind me. Klein thought for a moment, then he deliberately took 2 steps forward casually. He opened the carriage door and took note of it. After he sat down, the carriage began to move slowly. It was unknown where its destination was. "Why did you come here?" Sharron asked simply. Klein answered frankly, "I wanted to contact the both of you and ask if you have any books on mysticism. It would be best if they went in depth. As you know, I lack such knowledge." Maric continued, looking over with malice-filled eyes as he said in a slightly hoarse and low voice, "We do have a lot of knowledge regarding mysticism, such as Shaman King Klarman's Book of Secrets, but what can you use to trade for it?" "Shaman King? Which pathway and sequence is that?" As these thoughts flashed past his mind, Klein deliberated his tone and said, "I can trade for it with gold pounds. Or do you need anything else?" The pale, but exquisite-looking Sharron looked at him and replied stoically, "Help. We'll use your help as barter." "Help?" Klein repeated the word silently and was momentarily a little stumped. Back when Sharron had taken on the mission of protecting him for 3 days, it was mostly because of the money. For a Sequence 5 expert to be willing to take on such a mission was, in itself, a low probability. It could be chanced upon, but it wasn't something that could be forced. Furthermore, back then, Klein was desperately trying to save himself and was so frantic that he wasn't willing to give up any sliver of hope. As such, he still felt very grateful for being able to receive the help of such a powerful beyonder, even if it was because of the money. However, that was all. He wouldn't recklessly interfere in an unknown, dangerous situation in complete disregard of his own strength and circumstances for the sake of the other party. Klein's original plan was that the mysticism knowledge from Little Sun could basically be verified as belonging to the pre-cataclysm era. At that time, the ancient gods who wielded power and the current 7 gods and evil gods didn't seem to have any overlap with each other, so it was possible that the 2 mysticism systems were definitely hugely different. So, even if he knew the details, he didn't dare to carelessly try it out. He had to receive indirect verification in order to know which ones could still be used and which ones didn't have any effect. It was just like the sacrificial ritual from before. Klein had already figured out the procedure from the sun, but he waited for Mr. Azek's reply before he dared to conduct the experiment. It was to prevent anything unexpected from happening. As for the hanged man, he was at the rank of bishop or captain of the Church of the Lord of Storms, so he definitely possessed quite a bit of mysticism knowledge as well. However, the problem was that this was too orthodox and too involved with the Lord of Storms domain, thereby making it not necessarily suitable for Klein to use. Not all rituals could be performed by asking oneself for help, and he had to consider the spirituality burden he had to bear by praying to himself. With these factors in mind, Klein turned his attention to the former members of a secret organization, Sharron and Maric. The knowledge they possessed was more suitable for wild beyonders to use as a reference. There were also quite a few unorthodox and strange ones that were effective. Of course, this wasn't to say that he would give up on exchanging information with the Sun and the Hanged Man. By having knowledge from ancient times, orthodox knowledge, and secret and unorthodox knowledge, it would result in him being more all-round, giving him a deeper understanding of mysticism. And that was exactly what Klein wanted. He had never forgotten that his ultimate goal was to return to Earth, so the more mysticism knowledge he had, the better. The more comprehensive, the better, the deeper the knowledge was, the better it was. Of course, the premise of pursuing this goal is to get rid of Insanguil, and avenge myself and the captain. Klein looked at Sharron and Maric and said with the corners of his mouth curled up, "I need to know what kind of help you need from me before I can consider agreeing. I won't, nor is it possible for me to joke about my life." Sharron, who was wearing a small black hat, nodded slightly and acknowledged Klein's words. Maric, who was seated on the other side, leaned forward and put his fist to his mouth. "We originally belonged to a rather old and secretive organization." "That I can guess." Klein maintained a serious and stoic expression. "That organization took shape at the beginning of the 5th epoch, after the storms of the Berserk Sea cut off the northern and southern continents, forming the southern continent's Highlands Kingdom and Paz Kingdom. However, I'm only talking about it taking shape. This organization's origins can be traced back to before the 4th epoch, all the way before the cataclysm," the pale Maric continued describing. I know that too. The Rose school of thought, isn't it? It's traceable back to the time of the mutant king. Klein wore an attentive look. Maric scratched his slightly messy hair and said, this organization believes in an evil god, and they believe that magic is a science and art that changes according to one's will to change things. This requires the establishment of a religious ritual system, including law and order. Yes, before the invasion of the northern continent, they were an orthodox organization in the Paws Valley and the Star Highlands, alongside the Church of the God of Death. At the same time, they believed that their wills originated from various desires. Combined with beyonder powers, they were able to accomplish all sorts of unimaginable things. Because of these ideas, they retained an ancient and bloody tradition of primitive sacrifice, including the skinning of people and using the skulls of children as ritual objects, letting a large number of believers fervently release all sorts of desires. We couldn't accept the cruelty of such deeds, and we also felt that it was very problematic in the way that they handle their desires, so we looked for an opportunity to escape from that organization. Problematic in the way they handle their desires? Klein knew that the Rose school of thought was famous for its bloody sacrifices, so he wasn't very curious about the former. The blonde and black-dressed Sharron replied in an ethereal voice, the way they do it is to indulge and burn. Our philosophy is to repress and show temperance. So that's how it is. Klein suddenly thought of the description of the prisoner sequence. The body was the cage of the heart, and the world was the cage of the body. Madness was bound, and desire was suppressed. If the Rose school of thought did grasp the mutant pathway of prisoner, Miss Sharron's and Maric's philosophy is clearly more suited to the needs of the acting method. Why couldn't the other members notice this? That's not right. He frowned slightly. Seeing his reaction, Maric thought he didn't understand and explained in a slightly hoarse voice, they were influenced by that evil god, and they believed that indulging in their desires would help to strengthen their own willpower. When many people let their hair loose, they would also affect each other, adding to their fanaticism, allowing their condition to reach its peak. Our views are the exact opposite. We believe that desire must always be suppressed in one's heart, just like the flames and magma underground. Only at a crucial moment can it be unleashed, producing terrifying power. Simply put, it's the difference between lust and abstinence. The influence that the evil god has is in contradiction to his own pathway's requirements. It feels like something is amiss. Klein thoughtfully asked, so you escaped to Backland, and now they're coming after you? Did the dead man in the alley end up involved in this? We didn't get him involved. He got himself involved because of something else, Maric rebutted Klein's second guess, acquiescing to Klein's first question. Then, why don't you just run away from Backland? There are quite a few big cities along the border of the Lone Kingdom and Desi Bay. Furthermore, you can go to Intis, Fasak, Fainapotter, Lenberg, Mason, and other countries. In other words, you have a reason not to leave Backland? What could it be? Klein thought for a moment and said, okay, I've got the general gist of it. What kind of help do you need? My sequence isn't high, and I don't know any powerful beyonders. There's no way I can go against that secret organization directly. After obtaining the potion formulas for sequence 7, 6, and 5 of the seer pathway and killing Lenevis, Klein actually didn't have to stay in Backland. There was still a huge gap between him and his next target of vengeance, in Sangwil, who had sealed artifact 0-08. There was no hope of success within a short period of time. He didn't even dare to approach it, so it wasn't impossible to leave Backland. At the very most, he would feel the pinch for wasting the rental fee that he had paid up front. The reason why Klein was still staying in this large city was because there were a lot of beyonders here. There were also many resources and ingredients that appeared here. It made it one of the most convenient places to advance his sequence. It suited the revelation of his divination back then. When I become a faceless and am almost done digesting it, I'll have to head out to sea and look for a mermaid. This thought suddenly flashed through Klein's mind. Sharron replied calmly, be our support. To kill a sequence 5 beyonder, together. Klein was slightly surprised as he asked, with your strength, that organization only sent one Sequence 5 Beyonder to hunt you down? Could it be that the common characteristic of a cult was to be brainless? He has a sealed artifact that greatly restrains me, Sharron answered calmly, her face pale but her expression delicate. The person in charge of this matter is indeed a high Sequence Beyonder. But he has been led elsewhere by the clues that we deliberately left behind, Maric added. It's not like we only have Backland as our only base. If we can kill the person in charge of the nearby burrows and take away that sealed artifact, we will immediately disguise ourselves and flee. After that, we will no longer be afraid of being hunted down normally. Klein tersely acknowledged. But why do you think I can help? I look so weak. And the target is a Sequence 5 Beyonder with power and that strange sealed artifact. You're not just at Sequence 9. You're also very special, Sharron looked at him silently with her blue eyes and said with certainty. Haha. Klein could only reply with a dry laugh. Sharron's ethereal voice sounded once again. Besides, you still have that eye. That eye? Are you referring to the all-black eye left behind by Nimblewright Master Rosago? Klein nodded slightly. But I can only use a small portion of it, and it can't produce too much of an effect since it was corrupted by the true creator. That's enough. Sharron was always so terse with her words. Maric added, the Sequence 5 Beyonder we are dealing with has similar characteristics as Sharron. Only that eye of yours can help us find him. At that moment, Sharron spoke again. Maric will be the first bait. I'll be the second. As for you, you are the hunter responsible for solving the problem. I can't guarantee absolute safety. But you will definitely be safer than us. Sounds sincere enough, but I'll need to make sure through divination. Klein pondered for a few seconds and said, I want to understand the situation about the other person's characteristics and sealed artifact. Only then can I make a decision. Dressed in a black regal dress, Sharron pursed her bloodless lips and tilted her head to look at Maric, nodding slightly. Maric clasped his hands and said while concealing some of his madness, you know about the prisoner pathway, don't you? Yes, I've heard of it in the Beyonder circles, Klein answered frankly. Of course, these Beyonder circles refer to the Nighthawks and the Tarot Club. He sighed in his heart as he added. Maric seemed to recall something, and he was silent for nearly 20 seconds. Outside the window, he could hear the rhythmic sound of the carriage wheels rolling across the concrete pavement. He ruffled his messy brown hair and spoke with a slightly twisted expression on his face. Prisoners are those who are locked up in prisons, and that also corresponds to having their spirituality and desires constrained by reason, body, and the world. The Beyonders of this sequence have strong bodies and keen senses, often possessing both a state appearance and a crazy heart within them. They possess many criminal techniques and are proficient in killing with whatever they can casually acquire. Their corresponding sequence 8 is lunatic. I believe you aren't aware of this because even an Orthodox Beyonder organization like the 7 Orthodox churches aren't fully aware of such matters. That secret organization's member wields powers that far exceed your imagination. Those nearly twisted bastards are bound, be it their bodies or souls. It would be difficult to obtain any useful information by just relying on mediumship and divination. Sharron and I had also put up with this and waited for a very long time before we found a way to remove this binding and successfully escape. As all the Beyonders in this pathway are cursed and have crazy characteristics, we don't want to rely on the 7 major churches. We would lose all our freedom, without leaving anything behind. So that's the case. It's no wonder the Nighthawk's confidential information doesn't have much about this. It even lacked the corresponding sequences 8 and 7 of Prisoner. It's something I could know based on the level I had at the time. Klein replied with a sense of enlightenment, I really am not aware of the situation beyond Prisoner. Maric didn't nod as he looked at Klein with his brown eyes and continued, compared to a prisoner, a lunatic's greatest characteristic is to be able to autonomously sacrifice their rationality and let their desires run amok in exchange for strength and enhancements in every aspect. Apart from not having clear thoughts during this period, there isn't much of a problem. They can even gain stronger resistances towards Beyonder powers that can disrupt one's thoughts and influence their mind. To put it simply, I'll get rid of you first, and that will make it impossible for you to kill me." Klein couldn't help but lampoon. From this sequence onwards, the curse will gradually appear. "Lunatics easily lose control," Maric said as his facial muscles twitched. "Isn't that obvious? If a person's mental state has been operating at a nadir for a long time, or if there are frequent abnormalities, it would be abnormal if the possibility of losing control isn't higher than other beyonders." Klein had his own understanding of this. He turned to look at Miss Sharron, feeling that it was hard for him to imagine what she would look like when she was in the prisoner and lunatic stages. And throughout this, Sharron maintained her ghostly silent and ethereal state. Seeing that he hadn't said anything, Maric slowly exhaled and said, "The next sequence is werewolf. The mutation begins?" However, in the eyes of normal people, the crazy prisoners and the lunatics who are prone to losing their minds are actually similar to such mutants. Well, werewolf being a sequence 7 is lower than I expected. Klein's thoughts suddenly wandered. Maric didn't notice how he had gone adrift as he continued on. A werewolf is a fully cursed person. Every time the crimson moon becomes full, they will lose part of their sanity, grow black fur, and their bloodlust and desire for tasting blood would reach its peak. His voice gradually became a bit erratic, as if he recalled that bitter experience of enduring and repressing himself. A werewolf has rather powerful rejuvenation abilities, as well as terrifying strength, agility, and speed. Their claws and teeth are in no way inferior to beyonder weapons of the same sequence, and they contain venom. They also know some darkness-related spells. For instance, targets who are under the werewolf's control would become subordinates after a period of time, when a werewolf's venom infiltrates their body for a period of time. They would become a monster like a werewolf, and typically, these monsters possess very short lifespans. After hearing Maric's explanation, Klein made a pertinent conclusion. At the level of sequence 7, the werewolf is above average in terms of actual combat ability. A werewolf who is always unable to suppress their instinct to kill and their bloodlust during a full moon will turn increasingly cold and more twisted. Gradually, they will lose their feelings that a normal human would have, Maric added. There was an undisguised pride in his tone. It fits Mr. Azek's description of mutants. Klein subconsciously looked at Miss Sharron, instinctively imagining her werewolf form. However, her cold gaze almost made him shiver, and he quickly turned his head back. Maric unconsciously licked his lips. It wasn't the seductive kind done by women, but the kind that gave people a sense of danger. His gaze seemed to momentarily lose focus, leaving his recollections an unknown. After a few seconds, he opened his mouth again. "I'm at the corresponding sequence 6, zombie." "Zombie? Your outer appearance really does resemble one. It's no wonder you often play cards with a bunch of your own kind. It turns out that you are also a special kind of zombie, a real living zombie." Klein thought for a moment and said, "I heard from Caspers that you aren't afraid of bullets?" Maric nodded and said, "My body can be as hard as steel. Even if you used a revolver to fire at my head, I'll only feel dizzy at best. You'll need to shoot me 5 times in the same spot before you're able to break my defenses. And even if you break through my defenses, to a zombie, all other forms of damage isn't lethal if the brain isn't destroyed. And my strength has been raised significantly from the foundation of a werewolf. Furthermore, I wield a portion of death-related spells and can easily summon zombies and control ghosts. I can direct them and am proficient at using cold and decaying beyonder powers. Every sequence in the mutant pathway has different characteristics. There are very few changes in the progressive pathway." Klein pondered for a moment and asked, "Then, what about the curse of zombie?" Maric clenched his teeth and said, "I will thirst for the warm blood and fresh meat of humans. During the full moon, this state will be particularly serious. The only thing to be gratified about is that a zombie's curse replaces the werewolf's and lunatic's curse. They do not exist together, and it's the same later on. Every time the crimson moon is full, I will be in great pain. If I don't give up on self-control, I will be in so much pain that I will lose my ability to fight. And if I indulge myself, I will also become less and less like a human, and the risk of losing control is very high. Even in normal times, I would always resist the desires in my heart and the strong malice in my heart. Phew. Compared to the Beyonders of other sequences, the others are so much better. Well, except for Abyss and Demonis. Klein suddenly had such a thought. Maric paused and glanced at Sharron. Sharron parted her lips and said in an illusory voice, Sequence 5, Wraith. Wraith? There's such a sequence? It really is a mutant pathway. Klein was slightly surprised at first, but then he felt that this was indeed the characteristic of a spirit body that could be easily transformed. Having received the prompt, Maric added, after becoming a wraith, one can turn one's body into a real wraith and obtain the corresponding powers, such as moving through obstacles, hiding in mirrors, and directly attacking the soul of the enemy. They can jump through most things with reflections. And unlike ordinary wraiths, even with spirit vision, one will find it difficult to discover such a shadow unless they were a high-sequence Beyonder. Yes, wraith wields many death-type spells. There are many strange techniques, such as forcefully possessing the body and controlling the enemy. Her curse is that on the night of a full moon, she either consumes a certain number of human souls, or she becomes extremely weak. Choosing the former is equivalent to being on the brink of losing control at any moment. Without waiting for Klein to speak, the similarly pale Sharron suddenly said, Our target is also a wraith. The Beyonder powers of zombie, werewolf, lunatic, and prisoner won't be lost as a result of advancement, Maric emphasized. It sounds like my nemesis. I'm precisely afraid of the type who are impervious to revolver bullets and do not suffer immense damage when burned by ordinary flames. Simply put, I'm afraid of ghosts. Klein felt his heart thump a little. After pondering for a few seconds, he asked, What is the effect of the sealed artifact? Why would they restrain you? It actually made you willing to tell me your weaknesses and your curses. Klein had some general guesses. Maric's expression was somewhat gloomy as he replied, That cursed artifact that needs to be sealed is called Scarlet Lunar Corona. Up to a certain range, it can create effects similar to a full moon. For those who are already cold and warped, it would aid them with explosive strength, but we will become weak and lose our ability to fight. If I give up on myself, then I'd rather choose death. Maric growled hoarsely. I didn't expect a perverted and cowardly fellow like you to be a persistent person. To be able to last until the zombie sequence is indeed extraordinary. Klein didn't interrupt him and listened to the next part of the story. The person who wears the Scarlet Lunar Corona is immune to the effects of the full moon, and they will gain terrifying speed and unimaginable rejuvenation abilities, as well as a number of relatively powerful darkness-related spells. However, it will make the wearer's blood gradually turn cold. They will freeze up, bit by bit, and if they do not stop in time or drink the blood of a living person, they will ultimately die as their blood freezes up completely. Maric seemed to greatly fear the Scarlet Lunar Crow. After he was done, Sharron looked over at Klein with her calm blue eyes. Together with Steve are Zombie Jason and Werewolf Tyre. But as long as Steve is finished off, the others wouldn't be a problem. Maric added, If we succeed, the Beyonder characteristic left behind by Steve will be mine. The Scarlet Lunar Corona will belong to Sharron. The remaining spoils of war and the Book of Secrets will be your payment. Very generous conditions. Klein almost couldn't believe his ears. Although the most valuable items are the Sequence 5 Beyonder characteristic and the powerful sealed artifact with special powers, the rest aren't too bad either. It's impossible for a Sequence 5 powerhouse to only have sealed artifacts provided by the organization, and if any one of the Sequence 6 zombie and Sequence 7 werewolf is retained, it will be a bountiful harvest. Klein leaned back and pretended to think, to suppress the sudden greed in his heart. Your conditions are indeed satisfying, he replied and immediately returned with a question. Who is Shaman King Klarman? What kind of information is recorded in his Book of Secrets? Maric rubbed his temples and said, The Shaman King can both refer to a high-sequence job and also represent an outstanding person who controls powers in the domains of darkness, the moon, and the strange, one who surpasses his peers. Klarman is the latter, and also the former. He was active in the southern continent during the early part of the Fifth Epoch, and then he completely disappeared. Maybe he was hunted down by the Church of Death or our secret organization, or maybe he died of old age in some unknown place. His book of secrets includes knowledge such as secret contracts, rituals, alchemy, astrology, symbolism, natural interaction, and so on. Even if an ordinary person gets it, they can become an expert in the field of mysticism. They can even rely on their own natural spirituality to accomplish a small number of beyonder matters without taking any potions. Well, the price is that they will slowly become mentally ill. This is the aftermath of one's spirituality being unable to bear the burden. Sounds good. Just what I need. However, this mission is not only difficult in itself, but there's also a certain amount of subsequent trouble. I'm dealing with a secret organization with a history of over 1,000 years. Klein was silent for a few seconds, but he still chose to follow his heart. I wish to have some time to think it over. This is a very serious and dangerous matter. I can't be impulsive. I will give you my answer tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Come to my house. You know the address. He looked at Sharron while finishing the sentence. He suddenly felt nervous when he finished it. They had revealed so much important secret information, even problems that plagued them. If he didn't agree on the spot, would he be silenced? Or would they follow me until I make up my mind? Then, how can I go above the gray fog to make the divination? Sharron, who was wearing a black regal dress, looked at Klein quietly. There was no anger, doubt, or emotion in her blue eyes. She suddenly pulled out a folded piece of paper from a concealed pocket and unfolded it into a rectangle. The paper was orange-yellow, with many symbols, including those representing the sun. These symbols and labels drew out an empty zone, one which gave off a very warm and stable feeling. As soon as he saw the piece of paper, Klein remembered what it was and relieved his uptight heart. This was also from Numblerite Master Rosago. This was the Notary Certificate. Back when they were distributing the spoils of war, Sharron had taken this mystical item. The pale, delicate Sharron handed the Notary Certificate to Klein and said in a refined voice, "Press your hand here. Promise not to divulge what you just heard." Phew. Klein exhaled and nodded seriously. All right. According to the prompt, he took the Notary Certificate and pressed his palm against the blank area. Then, after some deliberation, he opened his mouth and said, "I promise I won't tell anyone what I just learned from Miss Sharron and Mr. Maric." As he said each word, the symbols and magical labels around the Notary Certificate lit up, one by one, giving off a warm and bright glow. When it was all over, the light turned into a seal-like image that pressed down on Klein's palm and even passed through it, covering the blank zone. A warm current passed through him, and Klein felt a subtle but invisible connection between himself and the Notary Certificate. Back then, the ability mimicked by old Mr. Eye of Wisdom really does belong to a notary. He suddenly thought of something from before. I'm done. Klein returned the Notary Certificate. Sharron calmly nodded her head and didn't say anything else. Her indifferent figure quickly disappeared from the carriage. Maric, still suppressing the malice in his eyes, tapped the carriage's wall with his finger. The carriage slowly stopped, and the door of the carriage opened. They're using zombies to drive the carriage and shadows to act as attendants. It really is Maric's style. After activating his spirit vision, Klein took off his cap in enlightenment, pressed it to his chest, bowed slightly, and got off the carriage. It was a quiet street, one where several of the street lamps were broken, but no one had fixed them. Klein first went to his one-room apartment in East Borough before returning to 15 Minsk Street and pretended to make 2 divinations in the living room. The first time was whether or not he should accept this commission. The second time was whether or not it was dangerous, and how dangerous it was. As for the answer to the divination, he didn't pay close attention to it, because wraiths of the mutant pathway could transform into spirit bodies, allowing them to directly interact with the spirit world to obtain information. In other words, they naturally possessed the power of divination and anti-divination, so regardless of whether it was Sharron or the target Steve, the revelation that Klein received was either wrong or deviated. After he finished his divination, he read the newspapers and books, as he usually did. He practiced his Beyonder powers in the activity room, then he washed up and went to sleep. There was nothing abnormal about it. At 4:10 in the morning, Klein suddenly woke up and jumped out of bed. He found a candle, built a wall of spirituality, and quietly began the ritual of summoning himself. Then, he took 4 steps counterclockwise and went above the gray fog, but he was in no hurry to respond to the prayer. Sitting in the high back chair belonging to the Fool, Klein focused on the surface of the long bronze table. He saw the all-black eye, Azek's copper whistle, the Dark Emperor card, and the dark, majestic figure of Roselle holding a scepter. The corner of his mouth twitched, and Klein stretched out his right hand to turn the card of blasphemy upside down. What I can't see can't hurt me. After conjuring a pen and paper, he took off his topaz pendulum and repeated his first 2 divinations. The result of the first divination rotated clockwise at an adequate frequency. That was to say that the commission should be accepted, but it also wasn't necessary. The result of the second divination was the counterclockwise rotation of the topaz pendulum, but it spun with great amplitude and frequency. Klein's interpretation was that there was danger, quite considerable danger, but it wasn't life-threatening yet as long as it was properly dealt with. Phew. After remaining silent for a few seconds, Klein remembered a hunch from before. Perhaps every magician needs to perform. Otherwise, the name of the potion would be mage, not magician. The key to never perform unprepared is to be prepared, as well as to perform. And this may not just be in combat. The 2 assumptions of diverting the enemy's attention and getting the applause of the audience is predicated on there being a performance. As long as I can find the appropriate solution, disguise myself well, and deal with it perfectly, it will be hard for the Rose school of thought to find me. Many thoughts flashed through Klein's mind. Combined with the revelation he had just received from the divination, he quickly came to a decision. Leaning back against the Fool's high-backed chair, he raised his head to look at the towering ancient palace and the boundless gray fog and revealed a slight smile. Then, let's have a grand performance. With that, he took the all-black eye and Azek's copper whistle and responded to his own prayers. The next morning was a Thursday morning. Klein, who had bought the ingredients early, prepared homemade Feinapotter noodles, which was closer to the noodles mixed with meat sauce. He went to the door to take out today's newspaper from the mailbox. As he ate, he found a notice of a Beyonder gathering in the Backland Morning Post. As expected, once the tense situation is resolved, the gatherings begin. Klein smiled and said to himself. At 9 o'clock, he took out his golden pocket watch, opened it, and took a look. Then, he faced the empty living room and said to the oriel window, I'm willing to provide help. The conditions are exactly as you said. But that's only if you give me a few more days. He paused for a moment before replying with a smile, I need to make some preparations. Other than Klein, there was no one else in the living room, but suddenly, an illusionary voice rang out. Okay. After you've finished preparing, you can pay the bar a visit. In Viscount Glaine's study, Audrey was sitting in a chair, helping Susie straighten the fur on the back of her head. She said to Furs and Zio, who were sitting quietly beside her while sipping their wine, why were you in such a hurry to bring me here? Although this was the first time she had seen Furs and Zio since the incident with Lenivus, she had already paid them through Susie. Well, after joining us at the Tarot Club, Furs seems to remain unchanged. She's still languid and fond of being snide with Zio, but there are some things about her that are completely different. She used to be dispirited, depressed, and she seemed to hold little hope for the future, but now, that aspect has completely disappeared. Audrey, the telepathist, smiled faintly and observed the state of Miss Magician with a calm heart. After downing the rest of the red wine, Furs said, It is indeed Ormer, the most famous red wine. It's much better than the ones I've drunk before. The level is very clear and each level has a different feeling. She put down her wine cup and said, The gathering that might have the spectator and clues to the psychology alchemists will be held this afternoon. Is that so? Why the rush? Audrey asked, puzzled. Furs explained with a smile, because the serial killer has wasted too much of everyone's time. Moreover, that's the outskirts of Northborough. It's during the afternoon when the nighthawks are most relaxed. Okay. Audrey nodded lightly and didn't ask any further. At the same time, her gaze swept across the room, and she sighed silently. Compared to the past, Xiao is a lot quieter compared to the present furs. At that moment, Viscount Klein chuckled and said, "Audrey, I will go with you." "Why?" Audrey asked despite knowing the answer. Klein cleared his throat and said, "It's because I've already obtained the apothecary formula. All I need to do is trade for some ingredients. My vault doesn't have the 2 corresponding ingredients." "Oh, first sold it to me. £300. She guarantees that it's authentic." £300. I remember that you bought it from Mr. World for only £230. Audrey couldn't help but glance at furs. In the suburbs of Northborough, in a soon-to-be-abandoned 3-story medical school building. Even at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the fog and the clouds had already darkened the whole of Backland, as if a storm was approaching. Along the dilapidated corridor, the gloomy light shone in diagonally, penetrating the windows and causing everything to appear silent and scarred. It was eerie and terrifying. This was Audrey's second time here, and she was no longer as nervous and tense as before. She turned her head left and right in her surgical cap and big mask, habitually observing the environment, observing every detail of this place. Viscount Klein was walking beside her and gradually turned apprehensive. He couldn't help but whisper, "Why do I find that this place is a little strange? Could there be evil ghosts?" As a mysticism enthusiast who had only half a foot in the Beyonder circle, the only Beyonder phenomenon he had witnessed was furs passing through walls and the opening of a door. He was still unsure of the existence of wraiths and shadows. However, this didn't stop him from being afraid of similar monsters. Furs turned her head and shot him a glance as she held back her laughter. Most of the participants of this gathering are Beyonders. If there really are evil ghosts or spirits, they would definitely be very happy. It usually implies ingredients or servants. Noticing that Viscount Klein was obviously relieved, she purposely added, "Of course, I'm only talking about the weaker kind of ghosts. A truly formed shadow might be able to kill everyone here without making a sound. And even if you run, all you can do is run back and forth between the 3 stories without being able to leave. It's like entering a maze." Xiao nodded in approval. "I've once encountered a similar wraith. I ran in circles while in the cemetery without any means of escaping. During this process, there were baffled people who would turn their heads for no reason, only to suffer a sudden death. If not for one of the Beyonders carrying a sun charm, perhaps you wouldn't be seeing me here today." Viscount Klein shivered as he looked out the window. At this moment, a withered tree branch hit the glass and made a light sound as it was blown by the cold wind. Klein almost shouted out loud, as he frantically inched towards the 2 Beyonders, Furs and Xiao. Audrey resisted smiling and quietly watched the scene from the sidelines. In her heart, she thought, "I have met Mr. Fool who is close to a deity. I know the city of silver and the forsaken land of the gods. I have heard of all kinds of terrifying monsters in the depths of the darkness. Why would I fear wraiths and shadows? However, I really haven't met a ghost yet." "Pooey. Audrey, what are you thinking? It's better not to come across this kind of thing. Unless I become a psychiatrist with Beyonder powers capable of influencing other creatures, or if I obtain mystical items that can restrain ghosts and monsters." The 4 of them couldn't help but increase their pace and quickly arrived at the gathering venue for the day. Before she entered, Furs found an opportunity to bend her back and whisper into Xiao's ear, "You did well cooperating with me just now. You actually made up a story so quickly that's enough to frighten others. Look at the spots which aren't covered by Viscount Klein's mask. It's so white that you can't see any colors." Xiao turned her head as she answered blankly, "I didn't make up the story. That was something that happened to me before I came to Backland." Furs was stunned for a moment before she blurted out a question, "For real? Why would I lie?" Xiao's puzzled face was obscured by the mask. Furs turned her head and took 2 steps forward and suddenly shivered. At that moment, Klein didn't wish to stay in the creepy corridor any longer. He reached out his hand and pushed open the door to the gathering venue. As the creaking sound echoed, he saw the concrete floor and the smell of antiseptic coming into his nose. It made him frown. Soon after, he saw a large pool in the middle. It was filled with a clear, yellow liquid, and there were floating figures inside it. Some of the figures were entirely naked. Some were rather complete while others had half their skin ripped off. They had the brownish auburn colors of beef jerky. They were corpses. Ah! A man's shrill cry resounded in the room. Gazes were instantly cast onto Glaint. These gazes were all from the figures in white coats surrounding the pool. They were also wearing surgical caps and huge masks, and only their eyes and a bit of their skin were exposed. Glaint's body swayed a bit. He wanted to turn around and run away, but when he saw Audrey, Furs, and Zio pass him, as if nothing had happened, in order to enter his room, he realized that they were pretending that they weren't his companions. As he took a deep breath, Glaint nearly vomited. He looked outside and saw that the corridor was dark and gloomy, filled with shadows, and that there wasn't a single living soul in sight. With another shudder, Glaint hastened his steps and caught up with Audrey and the others, finding a place to sit down as far as possible from the pool. After a few minutes, a figure wearing a white coat stepped out of the line and used a wooden pole with a hook on the side to pull a corpse to the side. Then, he directly dragged the corpse to the concrete floor. He paused for about 3 seconds, took out a scalpel, and slit open the body's abdomen. As the gash deepened, a cold and hoarse voice suddenly sounded from inside. "Let the gathering begin." Glaint reached out with his hand to press down his mask. His throat moved a few times and he almost vomited. They were midway in the gathering with all kinds of trades, either a success or failure, happening. Audrey, who had been calmly observing all this time, finally opened her mouth and said, "I want the spectator potion formula." Before she could finish her sentence, she felt several gazes sweep over her. However, they quickly moved away and didn't linger for long. After several seconds of silence, the transaction was aborted. Around 4 in the afternoon, it was getting closer to night. Why was there nothing at all? Glaint didn't maintain his aristocratic demeanor as he slumped against the wooden wall of the carriage and sighed. This beyonder gathering had left a deep impression on him, making him feel as if he had taken a huge risk. But even so, he was still unable to buy the horn of an adult flying unicorn and the venom crystal of a royal jellyfish. Furs secretly pursed his lips and said, "That's normal." Although Backland is the easiest place to get ingredients, if you can't join every beyonder gathering, there will still be situations in which you won't be able to find what you want for a long time. It requires either luck or patience. Mr. Viscount, think about Miss Audrey's spectator potion. She hasn't received any clues to date. Sometimes, you can encounter the ingredients, but you would lack the money to buy them. Zio, who was sitting to the side, thought in exasperation. Audrey consoled Glaint, "When I get back, I'll go to my family's vault and do a search. Maybe there's something you want." She had brought the rainbow salamander's pituitary gland with her today, but she hadn't encountered the spinal fluid of a Farsman rabbit. Therefore, she had only exchanged it for £320 in cash. It was to prepare for Susie's advancement. Glaint nodded, and just as he was about to open his mouth, he saw Zio sitting up straight. She frowned and said, "It seems like someone is following us." "I trust your intuition." "What do we do now?" Furs asked, looking around. "Following us? Why follow us? All we did was sell one beyonder item and obtain a few £100 in cash. Even if someone wanted to rob us, we shouldn't be the top targets." Although Glaint acted like a rookie, we didn't. In addition, the gathering's organizer had done a lot of things to ensure the safety of the members and to prevent anyone from being followed. Unless, the person who sent the tracker is the organizer. Last time everything seemed normal. What's the difference between the two occasions? Audrey's mind raced when she suddenly came up with an idea. Perhaps it was my request to purchase the spectator formula that attracted the attention of the psychology alchemists. It's impossible for them to randomly sell the spectator formula, so what would inevitably follow is recruitment into the organization. and recruitment isn't a simple matter. One has to be wary of any quasi-nighthawks or quasi-mandated punishers, or spies sent by other hidden factions. If they don't observe the target and conduct an investigation, the organization would quickly be destroyed. After pondering for a few seconds, Audrey said to Furs and the others, "Prepare to be attacked. Pretend as though you didn't notice the tracker. If we can successfully return to Empress Burrow, don't worry about exposing the identities of Glaint and me. Both of you have to leave in secret." Her green eyes swept over Glaint and she added with a smile, "A lot of people know that we are mysticism enthusiasts, so it's normal for us to find an opportunity to participate in a Beyonder gathering. Even if the tracker is an official Beyonder, they won't suspect anything. We are just regular people, so all they will do is warn us through other channels. But I'm already at sequence 8. Phew, in order to come into contact with the psychology alchemists, I have to take a little risk. It's likely the official Beyonders won't target me for seeking to purchase a formula. They shouldn't be able to bypass the gathering organizer and track us down. I want to believe in my own judgment." Audrey cheered herself on. "Okay, Viscount Glaint mumbled as he agreed. The horse carriage continued on as usual, going in circles a few times. In the end, Audrey and the others changed to another carriage as they had planned. Throughout this process, the tracker never attacked. When they reached the back door of Viscount Glaint's mansion in Empress Burrow, the two nobles used their usual means of returning. As for Furs and Zio, they each relied on their own skills to leave. About 10 minutes later, Audrey, accompanied by her huge golden retriever, Susie, and her maids, openly left through the front door, in her own carriage. As she listened to the sound of rolling wheels, she was unable to confirm if there were still people following her. She could only let her thoughts wander. It's obvious that the daughter of Count Hall isn't a spy of any Beyonder faction. There's nothing wrong with her past. Her love for mysticism is well known. Her status and identity can provide assistance that's different from other people. Perhaps, in 2 days, there will be members of the psychology alchemists who will try to come into contact with me." Audrey thought with some anticipation and some nervousness. Although he said he was making preparations, Klein spent 2 days at the Quelag Club as if nothing had happened. He even played a game of cards with the equestrian teacher, Talim, and the others, winning a few solely. Before he went to bed, he didn't forget to visit the outside of Lawyer Jurgen's house to make sure if there were no lights and to feed the cat. At 8 o'clock on Friday night, he put on his iron mask and wore his black-hooded robe and entered the activity room of old Mr. Eye of Wisdom. The only candle flickered its yellow flame, casting shadows on the walls around the activity room. Klein found the most convenient escape point before surveying his surroundings. He saw the Eye of Wisdom with his deep cheek lines and the plump apothecary. Well, after another comparison, even though he's wearing an iron mask that covers half his face, it's still pretty clear that he was the man I met at Rice Circus who deserves a beating. Klein looked away and waited for the gathering to officially begin. The woman who had an artisan backing her was very hidden among the participants, so he couldn't be sure that she was present before she spoke. After a few minutes, Eye of Wisdom raised his head to look at the mechanical clock on the wall and chuckled. "There's a lot of people here today. Let's begin." Before he finished speaking, the plump apothecary rushed to speak. "I need a Beyonder creature for an experiment. It's best if it's an animal, and it's best if it's already restrained and one that's not too dangerous." "A beast-type Beyonder creature?" Klein was slightly moved. He remembered what the apothecary had said in the circus theater and that he was apparently able to read the thoughts of beasts. He's just an apothecary, yet, he possesses such an ability and is even looking to purchase a beast-type Beyonder creature. After I sold him the Spring of Elf's Marrow crystal, he should have gathered the ingredients and advanced to the next sequence. In other words, the sequence after apothecary has something to do directing wild beasts? Klein made a deduction based on the information he knew. At this moment, someone responded to the apothecary with a sneer, who would keep a Beyonder creature by their side? It's dangerous and easily discovered. Wouldn't it be easier and more concealed to kill them to obtain its Beyonder ingredients? The apothecary was a person who refused to lose in a spar of words, so he immediately sneered. What a foolish thought. You can't guarantee that the Beyonder ingredient on a Beyonder creature is exactly what you need and that you can definitely sell it. You might as well tame it and direct it to be your helper, increasing your strength several-fold. As he spoke, his voice gradually grew softer. He felt as if he had revealed some important secret. Damn it! Why can't I control this mouth of mine? The apothecary figuratively smacked himself in the heart. As expected. Klein nodded indiscernibly. Without a doubt, the apothecary's request wasn't met. Most of the participants here were low-sequence Beyonders, and their statuses in backland weren't very prominent. With the need for them to be relatively alert, to the point of barely maintaining it, so how was it possible for them to extravagantly rear a Beyonder creature? Furthermore, more importantly, there was the fact that wild Beyonder creatures were usually hostile to humans. Any encounter would usually lead to one dead, so if one wanted to capture them alive, they would need to have a sufficiently strong team or be strong enough to overwhelm the enemy. Of course, this didn't exclude particular Beyonders who possessed special abilities that were suitable for such situations. After a bout of disappointment, the apothecary coughed lightly and said, "I've brought quite a few bottles of medicine. All of you know the effects. If you want them, you can speak up when the gathering is almost over. The few medicines to treat wounds, go berserk, and increase one's ability in that aspect?" Klein silently lampooned. He chuckled and provided a suggestion. You can purchase a Sequence 9 formula, find the corresponding Beyonder ingredients, and then concoct the potion to feed the animal you fancy. This way, you will have a Sequence 9 Beyonder creature, and you can also continuously advance it with the subsequent potions. Of course, that's built on the premise that you are rich enough and can deal with the defective ones that lose control. The apothecary was stunned for a few seconds. After a while, he said, "How extravagant. Just saving up money and finding the Beyonder ingredients for myself is difficult enough for me. It's also a high probability event for an animal to lose control after they consume potions. It will take me several times before I succeed. Someone who can do this must have a mine or owns a bank. Our tarot club's Miss Justice likely rears a Beyonder creature." Klein suddenly felt sorry for the apothecary. If one wanted to disregard it for the sole purpose of earning money, apothecaries were the easiest among the low-sequence Beyonders to amass large amounts of wealth. The problem was that they were also easily targeted by the official Beyonders. After a few more deals or failed transactions, Klein heard a voice that was deliberately suppressed. "I only brought one Beyonder weapon this time. They are 50 bullets with different effects. 20 of them are engraved with the Sun Domain's labels and symbols, forming a complete charm. They can be used to purify ghost-related monsters. They cause more damage to wraiths and shadows, so they are called purifying bullets. There are another 20 bullets which are meant for corrupted creatures, known as demon-hunting bullets. The other 10 are bullets that counter evil-type monsters, known as exorcism bullets. Their effects can be maintained for 18 months or more. 50 bullets for 500 pounds or the barbarian potion formula. It will come with a revolver with the matching caliber. They did make related bullets according to my suggestions from last time. From the looks of it, they're more complicated than ordinary Beyonder weapons. It took them so long only to make a set." Klein didn't give the others a chance and directly said, "I have the barbarian potion formula." At this moment, a rather tall man offered a price. 550 pounds. In this day and age, a revolver was the most convenient Beyonder weapon to use and carry. The well-hidden lady's voice was filled with unquenchable joy as she said, "Sir, I'm sorry. I have a preference for the barbarian formula. 600 pounds. The man raised the offer again. "No, this is not about money." The woman with an artisan backing her glanced at Klein. "Deal. But please pass the formula to old Mr. Eye of Wisdom for his notarization. Phew, it's a good thing that I got the Dark Emperor card. Otherwise, if I met someone who can raise the price so ruthlessly, I definitely would have lost a lot of money today." Klein rolled up his robe, took out the barbarian formula which he had long written from his inner pocket, and opened it to take a look. Sequence 8 Barbarian. Main ingredients, grass of madness, core horn crystal of a land rhinoceros. Supplementary ingredients, 1 deep-grained walnut, 1 fragrance hornet grass, 10 milliliters of the extract obtained from soaking poplar bark, 100 milliliters of liquor. After confirming that it was correct, Klein folded the paper and handed it to the attendant. Just like before, Eye of Wisdom took out the ring that was inlaid with many small diamonds. He mimicked the beyonder powers of a notary and confirmed that the formula was true. Hearing this old man declare that the formula is valid, the woman with the artisan backing her heaved a sigh of relief and took out a square iron box the size of a palm. After the attendant passed the formula to her, she eagerly rolled it open and read it a few times, as if she wanted to memorize it directly. As for Klein, he snapped open the box and looked at it. There were 3 piles of bullets inside the metal box. One pile had a faint golden luster, as though they had just been fished out of hot water. The other was entirely silver and covered with patterns, cold yet sacred. The pile with the fewest bullets suffused a golden sheen amidst the brass color. He could vaguely see several labels and symbols engraved on it. Yes, it's authentic. Klein had the ability to appraise the bullets in the field of mysticism. He snapped the lid shut and stored the item in the pocket under his robe. As for the free revolver, it was nothing special. The body of the gun was a deeper brass color, and the handle was made out of walnut wood. Since his underarm holster had also been lost back when he encountered the police inspection, Klein had to attach the revolver to his waist and cover it with his clothes. After finishing the transaction, he looked around the activity room and deliberately raised his voice. I need strong purifying items like sun holy water and sun sacred emblem. I can buy it in gold, or I can use formulas as a barter, like the sequence after barbarian, briber. Of course, if there are any questions regarding the mysticism and the beyonder world that requires answering, I can also give it a try, but I can't guarantee that I can answer it. As the apothecary listened, he widened his eyes. He had a feeling that this was that lucky lad. However, he had just become a beyonder not long ago, so how could he have obtained so many valuable things? The more he thought about it, the more he gnashed his teeth, feeling as if he had made the wrong choice back then. Luck was the most important thing. The woman who had bought the barbarian formula couldn't control herself and almost said in her original voice, I don't have anything you need, but I can pay you in cash. 800 pounds. Klein swallowed the word deal that he nearly said. He thought for a moment before chuckling. I'm only accepting bartering for the time being. I will most likely be back for the next gathering. You can seek out the relevant items in advance. For the time being. The lady ruminated over the word and nodded slowly. All right. After that, no one else said anything, and Klein's needs were also not met. In Backland, in the Lone Kingdom, the worshippers of the eternal blazing sun could be considered heretics, so few of such items circulated beyond official channels. Klein was slightly disappointed, but he wasn't too concerned. He had an alternative plan. He clearly remembered that Miss Zio had once sought out a beyonder believer of the eternal blazing sun for purification. And the lady who craved the briber formula would definitely be actively looking for his desired items. Klein stopped talking and listened to the subsequent exchanges. When the gathering was coming to an end, an average-built participant with no special characteristics pinched the iron mask on his face and said with a deep baritone voice, I need an adult black widow spider silk gland. An adult black widow spider silk gland? Sounds familiar. I seem to have heard of it somewhere. Klein frowned slightly. Without using divination, he tried hard to recall where. Suddenly, he remembered the source of the familiar feeling. It was one of the main ingredients for the demoness of pleasure. Pleasure was sequence 6 of the demoness pathway. Klein had obtained its complete formula back when he channeled Madame Sharron's spirit. Although it was usually difficult to recall the exact details, and he had to rely on the help of dream divination to recall the memory, just hearing the main ingredient was enough to give him a sense of familiarity and make him form connections. He couldn't help but glance over at the buyer, confirming that he was male in terms of skin color, figure, voice, and unmasked facial features. The sequence prior to demoness of pleasure is which? Regardless of their gender, as long as they pass that, they would all become women. This person clearly isn't one. He hasn't become a witch yet, so why is he purchasing the main ingredient of a demoness of pleasure? Could he be helping someone buy it? Is he the ally of some witch or a loyal subordinate? However, as a rather ancient secret organization, the demoness sect shouldn't be lacking in the corresponding ingredients. With their natural disposition, it would be normal for them to use the beyonder characteristics left behind by former members to concoct the potions. Did the witch behind the buyer lose her connection with the organization? With these thoughts, Klein had the impulse to follow him. However, after careful consideration, he gave up on this idea. Ignoring the question on how he could bypass the precautionary measures of Eye of Wisdom and lock onto the other party's tracks, just the fact that the other party's situation was unknown, and with him not having the time to perform a divination, it was enough for him to choose to follow his heart's wishes. What if there isn't only one witch, but a beyonder who's much stronger? Moreover, it's a good thing for witches to advance to demoness of pleasure. The former would cause calamities and harm many innocent people, but once they advance to the latter, their goal would be focused on pleasure. In simple terms, society would be less dangerous. Klein mumbled. An adult black widow spider silk gland was already considered to be relatively expensive and a rare beyonder ingredient. It was just like the thousand-faced hunter's mutated pituitary gland and the characteristic of a human-skinned shadow which Klein needed in order to ascend to sequence 6. It was almost equivalent to the cost of half a house in the capital, so the buyer didn't receive a satisfactory response. To be precise, no one responded. The atmosphere of the gathering fell silent until the plump apothecary started selling the medicine he brought. After the previous trials, he received quite a few repeat customers. In less than 3 minutes, he had sold all the goods he could sell and collected more than £50 in cash. As Eye of Wisdom announced the end of the gathering, each participant left through different passages in a different order and at different intervals. Klein was in the middle, and after he reached a secluded street, he took off his disguise and immediately set off for East Borough, arriving at Black Palm Street on that cold and foul-smelling night. On the way, he had purchased an armpit holster. He entering his rented one-bedroom apartment. Without taking a break, he took out his revolver and opened the metal box containing the beyonder bullets. He then took out 2 purifying bullets, 2 demon-hunting bullets, and 1 exorcism bullet. Then, he loaded them one by one into the chamber. Taking a pose, he tested the feeling and whether he could fire normally. Klein inserted the revolver into his armpit and busied himself with other preparations. For example, he checked to see if there was anything unusual about the all-black eye in the iron cigarette case. He also placed Azek's copper whistle in the metal box containing the bullets, and with the help of Holy Night powder, he created a sealed wall of spirituality that stuck to the surface of the box, completing the shielding of the ancient, delicate copper whistle. After confirming the shapes and positions of the 3 charms, Klein headed above the grey fog for divination. Then, he put on his cap and went out again. His target was 32, Verdi Street, which was south of the bridge. It was where the thief had found the master key. There might be clues to the apprentice formula or clues to related items there. It was somewhere that Klein had long wanted to explore, but he suspected that the man who died a tragic death had turned into a wraith-like creature. He didn't dare to take action until he bought purifying bullets. A magician never performs unprepared. Before the steam subway, the most economical mode of transport, had stopped running, Klein arrived south of the bridge before transferring to a public carriage and arrived near Verdi Street. It was already late at night, and a chilling drizzle filled Backland. There were barely any pedestrians on the street, and the light from the gas lamps was blurred by the liquid on the glass, making everything seem dreamlike. Klein circled the area and observed Unit 32's situation. He walked to its side, climbed to the 2nd floor, and easily entered the target's interior from the balcony door, which clearly couldn't be closed by the thief from before. He didn't bring the master key, fearing that the item would cause an abnormal chain reaction here. The layout of the house was very normal. A corridor that connected the 2 balconies ran through the entire 2nd floor. There were bedrooms, a bathroom, a solarium, and an activity room lining the sides. With the help of the crimson moonlight shining in from the balcony, Klein saw that all the doors had been opened. All kinds of items were thrown on the ground in disarray. It should be the result from the thief from before. He couldn't take away all the items, so he could only search for the most valuable ones. However, with the master key, there's no need for him to open doors. Klein went through the rooms, one by one, looking for things that might be involved with mysticism. After an unknown period of time, a black-gloved Klein arrived at the staircase without any success. Just as he took 2 steps forward, a figure suddenly appeared before him. The figure was pressed against the wall at the corner of the stairs, its back was facing Klein. Its black hair was so thick that it almost covered its neck. Klein, who had long activated his spirit vision, didn't even have time to observe, for the figure suddenly moved. His neck creaked as he turned his head while his back remained facing the second floor. Amidst the hazy, weak, and illusory crimson illumination, the figure's eyes were bulging out of their sockets, filled with fear. Thud. Thud. The 2 eyeballs hit the ground. Bang. The figure's head fell off its neck and hit the wooden staircase. He's long dead, he's without any spirituality glow. Klein watched and judged calmly, as though what had just happened was a farce. He guessed from the details of the man's old black clothes and the number of rooms open on the second floor, and he decided that this was another burglar, one who had visited the house after the previous one. Unfortunately, he wasn't that lucky. Could it be that the master key was actually restraining the danger here, and when it was taken away, pandemonium was set loose? Klein drew his revolver, adjusted the chamber to the firing position, and cocked the revolver. He walked up the stairs to the corpse. He squatted down and examined it briefly, but he couldn't find anything other than the fact that his neck had been twisted. After pondering for a few seconds, Klein straightened his body and carefully went down the stairs. Even though he was standing on a wooden staircase, he didn't make any creaking sounds. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. After walking down the flight of stairs, he reached the ground. In front of him was a corridor that connected the 2 sides. The crimson moonlight shone in, outlining the outline of the balcony. The doors on both sides of the corridor were wide open, revealing a messy scene of scattered items. There was no living room, dining room, or kitchen here. This is the second floor. Klein went down from the second floor, only to return to the second floor. Throughout the entire process, he didn't discover anything out of the ordinary. Klein didn't panic as he slowly turned around. Behind him, there was a staircase leading downwards. That is to say, my special ability can only resist the invasion of my Beyonder powers through the use of Beyonder powers such as dreams and spirit channeling, or for me to realize that the environment I'm in does not belong to the real world. I'll still be influenced by hallucinations. Klein took out his matchbox and took out a few matches with his gun-carrying hand. He continued down, throwing a match down every few steps. Once again Klein came to the corner of the stairs and saw the dead body with its head separated from its body. At this moment, a cold wind blew across the back of his neck, causing his hair to stand on end. "Pa!" Klein snapped his fingers, and a red flame soared from behind him, soaring toward the ceiling. Those flames seemed to be a monster that was baring its fangs and brandishing its claws, but the flames didn't burn anything. Klein was about to turn around and look with his spirit vision when his body suddenly froze, as if he had fallen into a lake frozen in winter. He couldn't help but tremble as his left hand was slowly reaching for his neck as he forcibly suppressed it. At that moment, Klein sighed softly. He forced his left hand into his pocket, removed the wall of spirituality, and opened the metal box containing the bullets. Next, he held Azek's copper whistle, took it out, shook it, and threw it into the air above the stairs. In almost an instant, he felt the coldness and stiffness in his body disappear. In his spiritual perception, a sinister and cold mass leaped out like a dog fetching a ball as it pounced at Azek's copper whistle. Klein smiled, raised his right hand, aimed at the copper whistle, and pulled the trigger. He softly said, "Bye-bye." Bang! The pale gold purifying bullet flew out and accurately hit that cold and indistinct object. A blood-curdling screech sounded out as the golden flames outlined a human silhouette in midair. Under the bright and warm light, all the coldness and evilness quickly disappeared. Clang! Isaac's copper whistle landed on the ground, bounced a few times, and rolled to the living room on the first floor. When Klein looked around, he saw that things were now significantly different. For example, the head of the corpse wasn't separated from its body. He had strangled himself with his own hands. It really is easy when you're prepared. Klein chuckled and went down the stairs again. He successfully reached the first floor and picked up Isaac's copper whistle. He then swung it twice to see if there were any other wraiths or shadows here. After confirming that there were no more problems, he decided to head straight to the basement. As he walked down the flight of stairs and went through the door, he saw the picture he had seen in his dream divination. He saw the brown notebook on the long table. Other than the master key and the silver pocket watch with inlaid diamonds which were taken by the thief, this place is still in the same state as what I'd seen in my dream. Klein looked around and saw black iron pots, glass jars, and bronze lampstands that had candles which had long since been extinguished. His spirit vision and spiritual perception told him that these were all very ordinary items. They didn't carry the slightest trace of a spiritual luster. But compared to before, there's still something extra. Klein reached out with his left black-gloved palm and touched the surface of the long table. His fingers were immediately stained with visible dust. After carefully and making some preliminary divinations, Klein failed to find any secret chambers or hidden compartments, thus, he turned his attention to the brown notebook. Carefully flipping through it, the contents of the first page entered his eyes. This will go into the annals of the rise of Accursed family. I want to remember every key point. Future descendants, please remember every word that I've said. It's a pity that you lost control and died just moments after taking the Sequence 9 potion. The illustrious glory of the Abraham family can only remain as words. Klein lampooned under his breath and continued reading, quickly flipping through the pages. He planned to take the notebook away once he confirmed its value, not planning to stay any longer. We, the Abraham family, were one of the most powerful nobles of the Fourth Epoch, and we were the main supporters of the Tudor dynasty. In that era, be it Loan's Augustus family, Faysac's Einhorn family, Intis's Sauron family, or Phainopotter's Castilla family, all of them looked up to us. Indeed, they weren't weak back then, but we were stronger. Even the rumored Antigonus family and the Zeradal families were slightly weaker than us. Unfortunately, the glory of our family disappeared in the War of the Four Emperors. Ancestor Bethel went missing in that war where the deities personally fought. The remaining high sequence beyonders all perished. Ever since then, our Abraham family has been under a terrible curse. Generations after generations of ancestors have attempted to revive our family, but without exception, all of them went mad and lost control. Some of them did so just before becoming a high sequence beyonder or at sequence 7 and 8. And every case of losing control brings about a disaster that is close to annihilating the family. The Accursed forget the family name carved in their bloodlines and hurt the other members of the family without restraint. They were already monsters. For the continuation of the family, the Abraham family made a painful decision to no longer live together. Instead, it split up into small families that migrated to various parts of the northern continent. That way, even if someone lost control and started a massacre, their bloodline wouldn't be cut off because of this. My father was afraid of the curse, so he chose to remain as an ordinary person. If it wasn't for the fact that the bloodline's last name is still ever shining, he wouldn't even be willing to tell me these things. I want to record this down. I want to keep it on my mind. I want to remember the glory and the disaster of the Abraham family. Every Beyonder generation would eventually lose control without exception. The curse of the Abraham family is even more terrifying than that of the City of Silver. Wait a minute, they should all be from the apprentice pathway. Could it be that they heard that Mr. Door's plea for help? This isn't a cry for help, it's clearly a life-depriving curse. However, according to Miss Magician's description, It isn't because she became an apprentice that she had heard those illusory ravings during the full moon, but because of her use of the bracelet on her wrist. Afterwards, she couldn't escape the ravings regardless of whether she wore it or not. And what's the reason for those Beyonders of the Abraham family? Perhaps the curse has nothing to do with Mr. Door? Well, the notebook mentioned that the ancestor of the Abraham family, Bethel Abraham, had disappeared in the War of the Four Emperors. Could he be Mr. Door? He was banished from the real world, lost in the darkness, and left trapped in a storm? There's a possibility that the easiest target to ask for help would naturally be descendants from the same bloodline who are of the same Beyonder pathway but of a relatively lower sequence. It's a pity that because all the powerful Beyonders had perished, his shouts only bring about a curse on the family that has lasted for more than 1,000 years, almost causing the whole Abraham family to disappear. Is this the reason why Mr. Door is so aware of the history of the Fourth Epoch and the details of the War of the Four Emperors? If my suspicions are true, I can only exclaim. The Abrahams really are an unfortunate family. I wonder if the things mentioned by the owner of the notebook were affected by the passage of time of over 1,000 years and the separation of the family, which might result in discrepancies. In the War of the Four Emperors, the deities actually personally participated in battle? Klein slightly frowned, and the speed at which he flipped the pages became faster and faster. Father, who chose to remain an ordinary person, ultimately succumbed to his disease. This dealt my mother a huge blow and she quickly departed with him. And that means I'm free. But what hurts me is that Father didn't tell me many things about Beyonders to prevent me from embarking down the cursed path. I have to come into contact with them myself and understand them. Thankfully, he didn't violate the orders of the Elder. He still handed me the potion formula of apprentice, trick master, and astrologer at his deathbed. I will repeat the 3 formulas to prevent myself from forgetting. Sequence 9. Apprentice. Sequence 8. Trick master. Sequence 7. Astrologer. After Klein saw that, he pricked his eyebrows slightly, feeling that the trip tonight had been worthwhile, and that he hadn't wasted the purifying bullet. Of course, he still had to go above the gray fog to confirm its authenticity. Astrologer. The apprentice pathway actually has a divination series job as well. In that case, one of my speculations from the past might be closer to the truth. The seer pathway and the apprentice pathway might be interchangeable at high sequences. Klein nodded slightly and continued to flip through the pages. Although he had already determined the value of the notes, he didn't want to leave the scene for the time being. If the last few pages of the notebook noted that something had been hidden somewhere, he would definitely have to come back again. Since that was the case, why go through so much trouble? As the pages turned, Klein roughly figured out the Beyonder history of this Abraham descendant. After his parents died, he began trying to touch base with the mysticism circles to gather information about the sequence potions and purchase the corresponding Beyonder ingredients. After 2 years of hard work, recording many still unconfirmed mysticism knowledge, he finally succeeded and concocted the apprentice potion. At the end of the notebook, he wrote, "According to my knowledge of mysticism, the spirit world and the real world would overlap the most on the night of the full moon. That is the time when one's spirituality is at its best, and it is also the most suitable time to consume the potion and advance. I will become an apprentice by the next full moon. I need to get stronger, step by step, and reproduce the illustrious glory of the Abraham family. Once I reach sequence 7, I'll be able to contact the elders according to the regulations set by the family. I know the method of communication well, so this is a secret that cannot be recorded. Take a potion to advance yourself during the full moon?" Klein was stunned for a moment. He couldn't help but tap his chest 4 times in a clockwise manner to draw the crimson moon. "May the goddess forgive you for your ignorance." Klein vaguely understood why the man had lost control on the spot. According to his speculation, the curse that had plagued the Abraham family for more than 1,000 years was probably related to Mr. Door's call for help during the full moon. And that guy actually chose to consume the apprentice potion on the night of the full moon. In that case, it was highly likely that he would hear that illusory mumbles while the effects of the potion had yet to fade, and his spirituality was in a very unstable state. As such, he exploded with a bang. Fortunately, the Hornacis Phlegria that I heard back then wasn't lethal. Klein subconsciously sighed. Then, he thought of the oddity of the master key and vaguely came up with a hunch. The formation of the master key stems not only from the condensation of an apprentice's beyonder characteristic but also from Mr. Door's illusory ravings. Thus, the occasional problem of causing the holder to be lost becomes rather dangerous. It often allows the holder to enter inappropriate situations. This can be considered a kind of curse. And taking everything into consideration, Mr. Door being the ancestor of the Abraham family, Bethel, is quite possible. Phew. Klein exhaled when he saw that there was no information about any hidden treasures. He took the brown notebook and left the basement. As he dropped Azek's copper whistle, he retraced the same path he took to get there. When he reached the balcony, he raised his left hand and snapped his fingers. The scattered matches on the stairs lit up with a crimson light. They soon extinguished, leaving only minor burn marks. After taking a detour to East Borough to get rid of his disguise, Klein returned to Minsk Street before midnight. He went above the grey fog and used spirit dowsing to confirm the authenticity of the 3 formulas. Soon after, he tried to conjure the fake world opposite him on the mottled long table. Klein was about to manipulate him when he suddenly raised his hand and smacked his forehead. I almost forgot. I brought the all-black eye back to the real world. After going through the trouble, he made the world appear in the majestic palace and changed the surroundings to look like that of an ordinary room. Then, he made the world pose piously as he said with a hoarse voice, "The fool that doesn't belong to this era. Please tell Miss Magician that I've already obtained the Trickmaster Potion formula. I hope that she can exchange it for items in the Sun domain which are good at purification and exorcism. If the value isn't equal, then I'm willing to make up for it with additional gold pounds." After manipulating the world, Klein turned the scene into a ball of light and transmitted it to the crimson star representing the magician. He clearly remembered that during the last time Miss Zio had found someone to purify and exorcise her, Miss Magician had also been present. 337 The search for a missing person plus, turn off reset. Furs flipped through the calendar on her desk and used a pen to mark the date of the upcoming full moon. She had decided that, as soon as she heard that horrible, illusory raving, she would chant the name of the fool and pass the painful minutes above the grey fog. Life is truly filled with things to look forward to. She closed the novel in her hands, ready to turn off the iron grill gas lamp that was set into the wall. At that moment, a flash appeared in front of Furz's eyes. She saw the boundless grey fog and a lofty figure that resided in a majestic ancient palace, as well as a man who was praying devoutly. When the voice reached her ears, she almost jumped, feeling both alarmed and joyful. The Trickmaster formula that I've been arduously searching for all these years has been found just like that? I participated in so many different Beyonder gatherings and failed to find any clues to the Trickmaster formula, yet, it has been found just like that? And not even a week has passed since I made the request. This is the Tarot Club. As expected, it's not something ordinary Beyonder gatherings can compare with. Furs sighed with emotion, and endured her excitement and joy as she cautiously responded, "Mr. Fool, is that formula authentic?" "Yes." The fool, who was sitting on the high-backed chair and looking down, replied calmly. Furs suddenly clenched her fist and secretly pumped it by her waist twice. Almost without any hesitation, she asked, "That was Mr. World, right? Please tell him that I will find what he needs as soon as possible." When the grey fog dissipated and everything was over, Furs remained stunned for 2 seconds. She couldn't suppress her excitement as she stood up to pace back and forth in her room. The Sun's domain, items that are good at purification and exorcism. I encountered them only twice in the past. But they were bought by others. They might not be willing to offer them again. Yes, back at Mr. A's gathering, Zio had hired a devotee of the eternal blazing sun to perform a purification and exorcism ritual. He's at least sequence 7, and he should have the relevant items. Or perhaps, he grasps key clues to them. I just wonder how much it'll cost. Although Mr. World promises to pay the difference, I might not be able to come up with the amount needed for the initial payment. Furza's thoughts gradually shifted to her financial situation. She now had £370 in cash, mainly earned from what Viscount Glaint had paid for the apothecary formula. She also had £510 in her bank account, which added up to nearly £900. As for something similar, it can go as high as £2,000, while the cheapest might cost from £500 to £600, yet, it might not necessarily be the kind of item that Mr. World needs. What if I run into a suitable item but don't have enough money? Get a loan from the bank, or a loan from an usury with a higher interest rate? As long as all goes well, then when Mr. World pays the difference, my debt will easily be repaid. Maybe I could borrow from Miss Audrey for a few days. She usually never cares about money, so she will definitely not collect any interest. Furz quickly came up with a solution. Just then, Xiao, who had gone to somewhere secluded at night to practice her combat skills, returned to their rented 2-bedroom apartment. Seeing that the lights were still on in her room, she knocked on the door and asked, "Are you pulling an all-nighter to write the beginning of your new book?" Furz, you seem really happy. Did the publisher increase your rates?" No. Furz was slightly taken aback before she forced a smile. "I just received a piece of information that's suspected to be a clue to the Trickmaster potion formula." "Really? Your waiting has finally paid off." Xiao totally didn't notice Furz's hidden oddity. Seeing her good friend so happy for her, Furz couldn't help but sigh to herself. "I'm already a member of a secret organization. From that moment forth, I've taken on a fate that requires me to constantly hide and lie to my friends. Is this the price, one out of many, to be paid?" Saturday morning. Klein once again visited inventor Leopard at St. George Burroughs' 3rd Street. Since the bicycle had yet to be patented, he only paid the last £20 and exhorted Leopard not to rush to talk about subsequent investments and partnerships until he had the patent. With regards to this, Leopard was very agreeable. He had been tricked twice before for the same reason. Before getting a patent, once the potential investors who he had made contact with had fully understood his product, he was kicked aside to watch as the potential investor bribed the patent office and acquired the patent first. After leaving Leopard's place, Klein arrived at Isengard Stanton's place in Hillston Borough at the appointed time. It was a dark and gloomy house. Today was the day that the rewards for the serial murder were going to be disbursed. Walking through the living room and into the activity room, Klein saw the 2 detectives he was more familiar with, Kaslana and Stewart, and sat down next to the latter. "Sherlock, how much do you think we'll get this time?" "It should be no less than protecting Adel." "Of course, I didn't do much, so what I can receive will be limited. Emperor Roselle once said, the more plowing and weeding, the better the crop." Stewart clenched his fist and held it to his bearded chin. Klein guessed with interest. The split might go as high as a few £100, and even the lowest wouldn't be less than £10. "And I'm the one that will get the higher end of the split." If Isengard Stanton's words were as credible as he had described, Klein added in his stirred heart. At that moment, a white-shirt, brown-vested Isengard, with white hair at his temples and a thinly contoured face, entered the activity room while carrying his signature pipe. As the fireplace burned, he sat down in a reclining chair and said with a smile, "Ladies and gentlemen, I just got back from the Backland police station. They acknowledged our contribution, and they think we've been instrumental in cracking the case. Although we didn't participate in the subsequent capture, we can still obtain half the bounty. In other words, we'll split £1,000 in cash. This is considered quite a handsome bounty, even in Backland. A single detective has to have 0 expenses, not eating or drinking, and even resorting to sleeping on the streets, for 4 or 5 years to amass this amount." The atmosphere in the living room immediately became relaxed. Everyone was filled with anticipation about the reward they would receive. Even Klein was no exception as he guessed the amount Isengard would give him. "It should be at least £100, right?" he whispered silently. Isengard took a puff on his pipe, narrowed his eyes, and said in a satisfied tone, "Everyone, thank you for your trust in me. I will now do the splitting. The biggest contributor this time was Detective Sherlock Moriarty. The ideas and train of thoughts that he provided us had allowed us to find more clues and put us on the right track. He's a genuine expert at deduction. Ma'am Kaslana can bear testament to this. I still have a few letters from Detective Moriarty, and anyone in doubt can take a look. That's very fair. He actually didn't list himself as the biggest contributor. Klein turned to the great detective, Isengard Stanton, and viewed him in a different light. It's no wonder that he has such authority in the detective circle. Seeing that there were no objections, Isengard nodded and said, I declare that Detective Sherlock Moriarty will be awarded £300. Immediately, the detectives in the activity room broke out into whispers. From time to time they looked up at Klein, as if they finally recognized this brilliant detective whom Mr. Stanton had praised as an expert at deduction. What a generous man, a just man. Klein grinned and ultimately didn't act modestly. In second place were Isengard himself and Kaslana, who each received £160, while the rest of the detectives split the remaining £380 depending on their respective contributions. Even the lowest received £15, equivalent to 3 or 4 weeks of their usual earnings. This was the benefit of handling a major case with a high bounty. Stuart, who had received £40, was very pleased because he felt that he had only done 2 days of observation. Furthermore, the subject he observed ended up not being the final confirmed suspect. Of course, he also had to pay a portion of the £40, all informants and helpers involved in the matter had to be paid. After distributing the bounty, Stuart suddenly remembered something. He took out a piece of paper from his pocket and said to Klein, Sherlock, I've recently accepted a missing person assignment that pays a lot. Try using your resources and help me pay attention to it. If the person is found, I won't forget your share. Sure, no problem, Klein replied indifferently. Stuart handed over the piece of paper and said, It's this man. He's been missing for nearly 2 weeks. As he's involved in some improper conduct or might even border on committing a crime, the client doesn't wish for us to seek the police's help. Klein nodded slightly and unfolded the paper. He saw a black and white photo that was made through lithography. It was a man with hair that was combed back in a slanted fashion, and there was a certain elegance in his propriety. He was about 27 or 28 years old. He had a handsome appearance, but there was an undisguised air of arrogance between his eyes. His nose was high, and his lips were thin. Right, his name is... Stuart recalled and said, Emlyn White. Emlyn White. Klein suddenly turned his head to look at Stuart. Ah. Isn't that the name of the vampire who's imprisoned in the basement by Father Utrevsky? In Duke Negan's mansion, Audrey, who had been invited to a tea party, was listening to her mother and Duchess Della chatting about nobility matters with a slightly bored expression on her face. Her eyes swept across the 3-layered rack, the uniquely styled muffins, cake, and other delicious tidbits. She felt that she had been indulging herself recently, so she lightly picked up her cup and sipped the black tea. After a while, she got up apologetically and, accompanied by the maid, went to the bathroom. As soon as she came out, she met a tall, middle-aged woman with slender eyebrows and a graceful appearance. It was Duchess Della's younger sister, the wife of a hereditary viscount, Lady Norma. After exchanging the formalities, Norma looked at Audrey and said with a chuckle, I heard that our beautiful young lady is very interested in mysticism? She mentioned mysticism. Could it be that someone from the psychology alchemists is here to test me? Audrey instantly entered her state as a telepathist. A little embarrassed, she lowered her head and replied, yes. After hearing Audrey's affirmation, Lady Norma laughed. What an honest child. I happen to know some experts in mysticism who are very knowledgeable. Would you like to chat with them? Definitely. That's exactly what I want. Praise the lady. Feigning surprise, Audrey drew a crimson moon on her chest. With a smile on her face, Madame Norma nodded slightly and said, How about we have our afternoon tea together tomorrow? No problem. Audrey's excited eyes held a little innocence. After she bade Lady Norma farewell and headed for the living room, her smile gradually settled as her bearing turned composed and relaxed. The detailed changes in her body language, the color of her emotions, and the changes in her body of heart and mind that were reflected superficially, they all imply that she holds no ill intentions, but she was rather nervous. It seems like Lady Norma might really be a member of the psychology alchemists. She had been observing my expression and actions, but she couldn't adjust or hide her emotions. Maybe she's like Susie, a spectator, but unfortunately, she didn't know that the person in front of her is a telepathist. Audrey thought, feeling both perturbed and proud. She couldn't help but let her feet gracefully walk in a straight line with one foot taking the place of the other. In the house of Isengard Stanton situated in Hillston Borough. Klein's lips quivered a few times, but in the end, he didn't ask Stuart who his employer was or what he looked like. He decided not to get involved in matters involving Emlyn White as best as he could. Although based on Emlyn's words, he was a law-abiding vampire, but that was only limited to his claims. There were still too many gaps about his earlier life for Klein to be sure that he had not harmed the innocent. As a result, he lacked the motivation to seek out Father Yutravsky to save Emlyn. After all, Father Yutravsky was a Dawn Paladin who was skilled in combat and had the aid of mystical items. Furthermore, he was an unweakened Dawn Paladin. Besides, it would make it easy for him to expose his true identity to Father Yutravsky and Emlyn White. Let's hope that he can gain the approval of that powerful priest as soon as possible and finish the sentence to be let out on parole. In his heart, Klein tapped 4 times in a clockwise fashion for Emlyn White. After the bounty was divided, the detectives took their leave, and Klein was given the best treatment. He was walked out the door by the great Detective Isengard. Holding his pipe, Isengard coughed lightly and said, "There are still some suspicious points about the serial murder case that we haven't fully understood. There might be an even more ferocious guy hiding behind the killer's back. You must be careful not to spread the word that you played an important role in this case. It seems like the official Beyonders also suspect that the gigantic devil dog has an owner." Klein replied solemnly, "I know, I had my own guesses about this too. Mr. Stanton, you have to be careful as well. You were the one who gathered us, and you're a major partner of the police." Isengard put the pipe into his mouth, then he took it out and said, "Sherlock, I guess I'll call you Sherlock. You can rest assured that, although I'm no longer young, I'm still an outstanding fighter, an excellent marksman with an instinctive vigilance. Furthermore, you have a high probability of being a Beyonder not from the low sequences. I just wonder which pathway you belong to." Klein thought for a moment and said, "Mr. Stanton, you don't seem to be a native from Backland? Your accent is closer to that of Civilaus." "Yes, just like your mid-seashire accent," Isengard admitted frankly. The two detectives smiled at each other as an acknowledgement of the other's observational ability. Klein returned to 15 Minsk Street before nightfall. "Well, I now have £1,224 in notes, plus 5 gold coins, and a small amount of change. This is quite a considerable amount compared to how much I had when I first came to Backland. However, Sequence 6 Beyonder ingredients will cost at least 1,500 a pop. Sometimes, because they're scarce and rare, the price might even increase several-fold. And Beyonders who can obtain such items usually aren't low in sequence, they wouldn't misjudge its value and sell it at a low price. It's quite impossible to pick it up at bargain prices. Although the lady with the artisan behind her is very eager for the Dark Emperor potion formulas, she has to consider the progress of her advancement. For her to only be at Sequence 9, it's quite impossible for her to spend a large amount of money to buy the formulas up to Sequence 6 in advance, unless she's filthy rich. Well, you can't always be so exploitative." While in thought, Klein was in no hurry to prepare dinner. Instead, he went back to his bedroom, drew the curtains, and went above the grey fog. He had an idea that he needed to verify. Sitting in the fool's seat, he stretched out his hand and picked up the unadorned brass master key. Based on the notebook he read last night from an Abraham descendant, he guessed that the man had lost control on the spot because of his choice of advancing during the full moon. Therefore, the curse-like ability of the master key, which can make people go lost, only to find themselves in bad spots, has a high probability of being contaminated by Mr. Door's illusory ravings, other than the resentment and indignation in the Beyonder characteristic. So what sort of changes will it undergo when the moon is full? Klein mumbled. Conjuring a pen and paper, he wrote the divination statement he had thought long in advance, what it manifests during the full moon. Holding the piece of paper in one hand and the master key in the other, Klein leaned back in his chair, gave a self-deprecating laugh and said, "I'm courting death again. But there shouldn't be too much danger this time. Mr. Door is far separated from the real world. He's lost in the depths of the darkness. Furthermore, I have the gray fog to shield me." In this case, the danger from divination was no different from direct divination. The experienced Klein half closed his eyes, and his pupils turning dark as he constantly chanted, what it manifests during the full moon. After 7 times, Klein fell into a dream. In that gray, detached, illusory world, he once again saw the basement where the Abraham descendant had died. The flesh and blood here had long since dried up. The silver pocket watch inlaid with diamonds and the ancient-looking master key had yet to be stolen. They were still lying on the ground. Suddenly, a sharp, hollow voice echoed in Klein's ears. It was like a thin needle stabbing into his head, extending inside, bit by bit, while it scraped as if it was going to completely peel off his scalp. This extreme pain caused Klein to wake up and sit up straight. He looked at the blue veins protruding on the back before they quickly restored to normal. It's much more manageable than spying on the eternal blazing sun or secretly listening to the true creator's angry roars. Klein went from pressing down his fingers to wrapping them as he thought. Of course, if this were the outside world, he believed that he absolutely wouldn't have had such a reaction. If Miss Magician had always been listening to such pleas, she would have long lost control. From the looks of it, due to the resulting curse, the master key makes the voice even clearer. That's not right. Father Yutravsky has likely survived the night of the blood moon with the master key in hand. He clearly wasn't affected. Perhaps he had stored the master key in his bedroom and stayed in the hall outside for confession. As long as one makes contact with the master key, they will hear the pleas during the full moon? Phew. Before becoming a high-sequence Beyonder, I wouldn't dare listen to it in the real world. What I heard just now seemed to be requesting assistance in ancient Hermes. Klein carefully recalled and confirmed what he had heard. With regards to this, the only thing he could do was twitch the corner of his mouth. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. This is really a death-style plea in the true meaning of the phrase. It's a pity. If only we could make those people from the Rose School of Thought hear Mr. Door's plea for help on the night of the full moon. With their already cold, warped personalities, they would definitely explode one after the another. After carefully considering if there was any way to achieve this goal, Klein returned to the real world, and according to his plan, he enjoyed dinner, changed his clothes, and left the house. He made 2 transfers and arrived outside the Bravehearts bar. He only circled it once without ordering any alcohol before leaving. While doing so, he noticed that Casper's was back again. After walking a block, Klein specially got on a rental carriage and made the driver head to Cherwood Borough. An illusory figure appeared in front of him just as the horse moved forward. It was Miss Sharron, wearing a long black regal dress. "Are you done with your preparations?" Sharron asked coldly. The soft black cap on her head was firmly pressed against her light blonde hair. Coupled with her pale face, her exquisite facial features gave her the beauty of a doll. Klein answered frankly, "Not yet. I'm still waiting for an item." Sharron said with unperturbed blue eyes, "I've prepared a mystical item." "That's why you took the mission of being a 3-day bodyguard for £1,000? Back then, the item caught your eyes, but you lacked the money?" Klein smiled in enlightenment. "Don't be anxious. The more prepared we are, the greater the chance of success. Furthermore, I can usually use a mystical item from the Sun domain to make up for my shortcomings." Klein added in his heart. Seeing that Sharron had stopped talking, he said, "I came here today to get you guys to help me in an experiment." "What is it?" Sharron asked simply. Klein said with a serious and trustworthy expression, "According to Maric's description, I think your curses are different. During the full moon, he has to endure the crazy desire for bloodlust which makes him unable to fight. As for you, you would enter a weakened state if you do not absorb the souls of humans. Is that right? Sharron listened quietly and nodded. Yes. I don't have any solution to your problem at the moment, but I think it's still possible to suppress Maric's problem temporarily. For example, taking appropriate medicine and letting him be in a state where he doesn't have any emotions. That way, during that time, he won't be in pain, and he will be able to participate in the battle. Klein expressed his thoughts. Sharron shook her head and said, it doesn't work. Such medicine is no longer effective against him. No longer? In other words, it had worked before? Klein thoughtfully asked, why? He had injected too much in the past. Even if he changed types, it'll only be effective for the first 3 to 4 times. We're unable to find any new types. Sharron said, suddenly turning silent, as though remembering something. Hearing her words, Klein immediately smiled. I have a different kind of sedative here, from that apothecary. Seeing that Sharron didn't say that this sedative was ineffective, he clasped his hands and continued, I'll give you one and let Maric try it during the full moon. It's going to be a full moon tomorrow night. If it's effective, let him drink 2 or even 3 in one go before the battle. As for whether he would develop a resistance to the same medicine in the future, that's not something that needs to be considered right now. Klein thought calmly. Sharron took the sedative that was stored in a glass tube, looked at the liquid that looked pure, and lightly nodded. All right. As expected of someone who doesn't waste her breath. Klein smiled and said, Miss Sharron, can you tell me the candidate locations for the battleground that you've decided on? I wish to familiarize myself with the surroundings in the next few days. This way, no matter where you ultimately choose, my preparations would be more than sufficient. And since they have the right to choose the location of the final battle, they won't worry about the possibility of me informing the authorities or any other Beyonder who might try to take advantage of the situation. Of course, if she really doesn't trust me, she could try another notarization. Klein thought quietly. Sharron stared at him for a few seconds with her blue eyes before saying, prepare a map of Backland when you're back. Leave it on the coffee table. No problem. I hope that this cooperation will not only go smoothly but also be enjoyable. Klein habitually leaned forward to shake hands. Sharron lowered her head to take a look, and her figure gradually faded into the air. Klein continued his motion and raised his right hand to smooth his black hair, laughing dryly in the process. He had asked for the location of the battleground ahead of time, not only to prepare for the mission but also to be on guard against Sharron and Maric. Although their philosophy was to suppress and restrain their desires, and it was unlikely they wouldn't kick someone to the curb when they'd outlived their usefulness. Klein couldn't be sure that Wraith Steve, Zombie Jason, and Werewolf Tyre didn't have what they had abnormally desired. If there really was a treasure that would cause any ordinary Beyonder to have strong malicious intent, Klein really couldn't guarantee that the 2 mutants would be able to control themselves. Therefore, he had to figure out the environment in advance and prepare an escape route in the event that they wished to silence him. It wasn't that Klein didn't trust Sharron, who he had went through life and death with, but it was the most basic form of self-protection. One shouldn't have the heart to harm others, but one must be vigilant so as to not be harmed. Klein turned his head to look out the window and sighed inwardly in Chinese. One gas lamp after another kept being left behind as the carriage went forward. The streets became more spacious and cleaner, and it took him more than half an hour to get back to Minsk Street. It's really expensive taking a carriage at this time. Klein looked up at the nearly black sky and the red moon that seemed to barely pierce through the clouds. He walked on for a while, and suddenly he saw that the house of lawyer Jurgen was dark. Pulling out his gold pocket watch, he pressed it open and glanced at it. With a chuckle, Klein detoured to Jurgen's door and used the key that he had been given to open it. At that moment, Brody the black cat was already quietly sitting behind the door, staring at the visitor with his pair of dark, round green eyes. The room was dark and silent, bleak and lonely. Klein squatted down and tried to touch Brody's head, but Brody quickly moved back and flung his hand away in disgust. Shaking his head with laughter, he got up, opened the valve, and lit the gas lamp. Following Jurgen's descriptions, he went to the cupboard to find the food that had already been prepared. Then, he went into the kitchen, lit the kettle to boil some water, and prepared Brody's favorite dish, boiled chicken breast. The black cat followed him in, and with an agile leap, it reached the counter. It sat beside him and watched him without making a fuss. Klein glanced at it, rehearsing the shredding of chicken breast in his mind while he chatted with Brody. You must miss Mrs. Doris, right? Are you worried about her condition? Lawyer Jurgen didn't come home today. Are you feeling lonely and uncomfortable on your own? Do you feel like you lack a sense of belonging and are exhausted? As he spoke, Klein's voice slowly faded into silence. Brody the black cat remained sitting there, quietly watching him. It didn't make any noise, nor did it cry out. Audrey was invited to tea at Lady Norma's house. These are the mysticism experts that I mentioned. Lady Norma introduced the distinguished guests warmly. This is Mr. Hilbert Alucard, a psychologist and a jewelry designer. He's very talented. This is Miss Escalante Ocelica. She's a doctor for mental health, what we usually call a psychiatrist. Hilbert Alucard was a man in his 40s. He looked to be of southern continent descent, and his skin was brown. His brown hair, blue eyes, and facial features weren't particularly outstanding. He gave off a silent and reserved feeling. Escalante Ocelica was a baby-faced lady who looked like a young girl studying at a public or grammar school even though she was already a psychiatrist. She was 3 or 4 centimeters shorter than Audrey, and she had long raven black hair that reached her waist and a pair of lake blue eyes. Audrey exchanged a few pleasantries with him, then she sat down, keenly aware that Alucard and Escalante were observing her. She didn't use her telepathist abilities, and she pretended to know nothing. While initiating topics in the field of mysticism, she constantly paid attention to her emotions, ensuring that they were in the most logical state. I can't let them find out that I'm already a beyonder, and that I have already taken the spectator and telepathist potions. Audrey knew exactly what role she was to play today. Unlike the silent Alucard, Escalante was quite a conversationalist. After a few rounds of exchanges, she asked, "Do you know about major years and major months?" "No, I haven't heard of those," Audrey cautiously answered, using only the knowledge she had obtained from her interaction with mysticism enthusiasts. "In fact, I've already learned from Mr. Hanged Man what a major year and major month is," she added with a smile in her heart. A major year refers to the number of years it takes for the planet to deviate from its axis, totaling 25,920 years. In the field of mysticism, this is considered a complete cycle that goes from the beginning to the end. A major month refers to the number of years it takes for this deviation to pass through one of the 12 constellations. Each major month represents 2,160 years. During the transition of major months, terrible disasters will occur. And according to calculations, we aren't too many years away from the end of the current major moon. Escalante spoke with confidence, keeping the atmosphere harmonious. Audrey hid the fact that she knew a lot as she asked the wrong questions from time to time in a curious tone. With this, time passed quickly. At the end of tea time, Alucard and Escalante stood up at the same time to take their leave, leaving Lady Norma's house. This caused Audrey to be rather disappointed. She imagined that they would eventually hint at the matter regarding the psychology alchemists, but in the end they didn't say anything. Yes, as a secret organization that cannot be exposed, the examination of candidates can't be that simple and direct. From the looks of it, they will need to interact with me a few times and observe me in secret before they decide whether or not they want to reveal information to me and recruit me into the organization. That's good too, I can report this to Mr. Fool. Audrey quickly understood the underlying reasons. She then took her leave, and Lady Norma walked her to the door, smiled, and said, "Audrey, I see that you're also interested in psychology? Why not consider being a psychiatrist before you get married? Count Hall and his wife are followers of the goddess. They should be able to support you in doing such things." Among aristocrats, unless there was a financial crisis or other special situations, coming to an agreement on marriage required a long process. Only after careful consideration and comparisons would they be able to make a decision. This was because this wasn't only a matter between two youngsters, but it also involved the alliance and mutual assistance of the two families. Therefore, although aristocratic women were able to officially enter social events under the direction of the queen after the age of 18, proclaiming their adulthood and consideration for marriage, they often started a family after the age of 26 according to statistics. Similarly, the average age of a male aristocrat's entry into politics for the first time was 28.5 years. In other words, Audrey would have about 8 years to do what she liked after she reached adulthood. The Church of the Evernight Goddess had always encouraged female believers to go out to work and engage in certain occupations. In the aristocratic circles, many young ladies and women became literary critics, musicians, pianists, painters, etc. Is this a test? Audrey smiled faintly and replied, I will need to read more books in that case. Actually, she had always felt that it wasn't too safe for the members of the psychology alchemists to become psychologists or psychiatrists because the upper echelons of the official organizations, such as the Nighthawks and the mandated punishers, likely knew of the acting method. Therefore, they would definitely pay more attention to this group of people. Lady Norma seemed pleased with her answer and nodded with a smile. Escalante and Alucard are both good teachers. Well, maybe I could consider asking Miss Escalante to be my home tutor on psychology. Audrey nodded obediently. When Klein got up on the early Sunday morning, he found that the map of Backland on the coffee table in the living room had been circled in several places, and they weren't too far apart. Therefore, he spent the rest of the morning carefully familiarizing himself with the surroundings, figuring out exactly where the buildings were located, and where the nearest cathedral was. In the afternoon, having time to spare again, he went to the Quelag Club to practice his shooting and beyonder powers. As soon as he entered the hall, he saw the surgeon, Aaron Ceres, hobbling out slowly from the buffet cafeteria with a crutch. After greeting him, he asked out of concern, How have you been lately, Aaron? Has your luck improved? Aaron, who was born with a blank face, smiled sincerely. At least I'm not that unlucky anymore. I followed your suggestion, went to the cathedral, and told the bishop about the matter. He told me to go directly to the confessional to pray to the goddess. I actually fell asleep while praying, but I felt like the goddess had bestowed me with a peaceful state. After that, my luck has been normal. Praise the lady. He drew a crimson moon on his chest. According to my experience, it was likely a particular sequence 7 nightmare who caused you to fall into a deep sleep. Then, a Nighthawk, who specializes in rituals, quickly set up an altar, prayed to the goddess, and neutralized your misfortune. Klein smiled. That's great. At that moment, Aaron looked at him and said, Sherlock, I've always felt that you weren't very pious in your belief of the god of steam and machinery. Why don't you change your faith? Look at me, a perfect example. Put your faith in the goddess. Aren't you making things difficult for me? Upon hearing Aaron's request, Klein almost drew the crimson moon on his chest, but he ultimately resisted the urge and replied very seriously, Perhaps there's something about my behavior that has led you to misunderstand. But I have to tell you that faith is something that cannot be changed after it's decided upon. Aaron immediately raised his arms and made an apologetic gesture. I'm sorry that I misunderstood your faithfulness. I shouldn't have taken your faith as a joke. Alright, our differences in faith do not prevent us from becoming friends. Klein wiped away the fake expression he put on and smiled. That's not true in Fasak and Fainapotter. They can only accept one faith. In comparison, with so many churches coexisting for more than 1400 years, Lone and Intis are much more open in this respect. Before Aaron could answer, he casually changed the subject. Did you see Will Septon again? I'm referring to the kid that had one of his legs amputated, the one who said that your luck would turn for the worse. He was certain that the Nighthawks would follow the clues provided by Aaron, so he wondered what the outcome was. He was curious if the child who changed Aaron's luck still had the tarot card in his possession. No, I haven't seen him since he left the hospital. Aaron shook his head firmly. What a pity. The Nighthawks can find his address according to the hospital's records, and it's not convenient for me to be involved. Of course, the child might have moved away long ago. After a brief exchange with Aaron, Klein decided to head for the underground shooting range, familiarizing himself with his free revolver with ordinary bullets. At this moment, two more acquaintances came in. One was a member of the National Atmospheric Pollution Council, Klein Company shareholder, Ma'am Mary, and the other was Klein's landlord, Stellan Sammer. They were all wearing relatively light skirts, making them look much younger. According to the rules of the club, each member could only bring in one additional person, therefore, Mary's maid and her bodyguard were left in the reception hall. Klein politely greeted them and praised them out of courtesy. Ladies, you two are as beautiful as ever today, and yet there is a beauty that's different from your usual beauty. Having come into contact with a lot of important figures recently, Mary smiled and said, Roselle said that exercise is a necessity of life, and Stellan is always at home, dealing with trivial matters. Even when she's out, she would be participating in parties and listening to operas. Her health is much worse than it used to be, so I brought her here to play tennis and squash. With her high cheekbones, she looked around and saw a member of the House of Commons and two other members of Parliament of the Greater Backland area. She then turned to Stellan and said, I see someone I know. Excuse me while I head over to greet them. You can wait for me at the library. All right. Compared to Mary, Stellan was clearly much prettier, but towards this lady, she seemed very respectful and docile. After Mary had gone some distance away, she slightly raised her chin, looked at Klein and asked, Mr. Moriarty, you seem very busy these days? Yes, I was working with a lot of detectives to help the police investigate the serial murder case. We made a certain contribution and received quite a sizable reward, Klein answered truthfully. Stellan covered her mouth with her hand. Really? What did the murderer look like? Why did he kill those ladies? The newspapers had been very vague. I'm sorry, I have to comply with the confidentiality clause. Klein deftly made up an excuse. It's not like I can tell you that it had a body of black fur, a smooth, glistening tail, and that it likes to run on all fours. Klein lampooned inwardly. Stellan nodded regretfully, and then she asked curiously, so how much did you get? It was split among quite a number of us. Klein didn't answer directly. Was there 50 pounds? Stellan pressed. Yes. Klein nodded honestly. Stellan Sammer smiled. You earn a lot more than I imagined. You really are a capable detective. No, it might take years to come across such a case. Klein smiled and shook his head. No matter what, you have proven your ability. Stellan's eyes looked like they were thinking as she said, next Sunday, Luke and I will be hosting a party at home. I hope you can come. Sorry. I was very presumptuous. I'll have my maid send the invitation to you. Heh, there will be a lot of unmarried ladies at the party, and their fathers or mothers will have decent jobs, and their families will earn more than £200 a year. Some of them have part-time jobs that they can do at home, such as being a typist. They're all very excellent women. This is a blind date party. Mrs. Stellan has approved of my ability to make money as a detective, so she plans on introducing me to a girl? But in her eyes, am I only fit to be with a woman at that level? Many thoughts flashed through Klein's mind, but after considering the need to maintain their neighborly friendliness and the trouble of preparing his own dinner, he agreed with a smile. If all goes well, I'll be there on time. Stellan smiled and said, then Luke and I will be awaiting your visit. She left without another word and entered the small library of the club, while Klein proceeded to practice his shooting and beyond her powers in the small, enclosed shooting range. At 9 o'clock at night, Klein was sitting at his desk, watching as the crimson moon gradually pierced through the clouds, revealing a full body. The water-like, light red veil slowly spread out, and time passed by the minute. When it was 10:15, he heard illusory pleas that seemed layered. Klein easily guessed that it was from Miss Magician. Closing the curtains, he switched off the lights, took 4 steps counterclockwise, and went above the gray mist. There, he reached out to touch the shrinking and expanding crimson star. In a split second, the hazy figure of furs appeared on the chair with the symbol of a layered door. She let out a sigh of relief, stood up, and bowed. "Honorable Mr. Fool, you have saved me once again." "That's not something to worry about," Klein replied in a very light, casual tone. Furs was left speechless and sat down again. She was considering what had just happened, so she didn't say anything. As for Klein, he didn't take the initiative to bring up any subjects in order to maintain his image. Within the towering palace, which looked like a giant's residence, the silence quickly transformed into the main theme. When Furs snapped back to her senses, she suddenly felt that this atmosphere was a little oppressive and uncomfortable. During the gathering, there's still Miss Justice, Mr. World, and company. There was no need to worry about complete silence, but now, there's only Mr. Fool and me. What should I do? This pressure is stifling. I need to say something, I have to. I can't just sit here like an idiot. That's Mr. Fool. He certainly wouldn't care about anything, but I'm so nervous and restricted. Furs suddenly felt as though she had found herself alone with her boss when she first entered the workforce. Although Klein wasn't a spectator, he could clearly see Miss Magician's restraint and uneasiness. He smiled and said, "Maybe you can tell me how you became a Beyonder. For example, how you obtained the apprentice formula and that bracelet." Klein silently added the real question he was trying to get by. Furs relaxed a little and recalled. "That was almost 3 years ago. I just graduated from Backland Medical School. With my father's help, I entered a private clinic with pretty good benefits." My father had already settled down in East Balam back then. Ever since the safe sea route to the southern continent was discovered, the outstanding youth of the kingdom started spreading their footprints to every corner of the land. My father, as a low-level military officer, went to East Balam to chase after wealth and power. My mother and I were left behind in Backland to live like widows. It would take months before a distant letter sent by boat would arrive. This situation isn't uncommon in the kingdom. I knew an old gentleman who had 5 children, but they were either in the archipelago, Western Balam, the Paz Valley, or the Hajenti Plains. They have their own career, their own family, and their own wealth, but they've forgotten that there is a father waiting for their return all this time. When I was in grammar school, my mother fell seriously ill. I had no choice but to helplessly watch her die on the hospital bed, and it took my father a month to answer my letter, telling me that he had a new family and a new life in East Balam. He gave me all his property in Backland plus some money. I think he felt a little guilty. As a best-selling novel writer, Furs had mastered the art of rambling. Since Klein had nothing to do, he listened quietly without interrupting. Phew. Furs exhaled and continued, "Anyway, my father introduced me to Yosefov Clinic through the Veterans Club. The salary there was really good, and I was doing pretty well, but I was a little anxious about the future. Hence, I worked hard to learn from the senior doctors and worked hard to save money until I met an old lady who came to see me regularly. She was very lonely and childless, and her partner had passed away 10 years ago. I had some sympathy for her, so I often talked to her and accompanied her. Once, I was surprised to find that she was able to walk through walls, which opened a whole new world to me. That old lady said that it was something her husband left her. She vaguely mentioned that as long as one wasn't a member of some family, there was apparently no curse. Not long after, she was so ill that she was on the verge of passing away. She asked me if I wanted to become someone like her. I was very young then, and I still had a lot of fantasies in my head. I agreed without any hesitation. She gave me the formula and told me to watch her body after she died and take away the glowing object that would suddenly appear. And this was the thing she left me, which could be used as the main ingredient of a potion. Also, she gave me this bracelet, telling me not to use it unless I'm in absolute danger. She also told me not to pay too much attention to the ravings during the full moon. Unfortunately, I was ultimately unable to avoid danger. After using it once, the full moon's raving became worse. It seems like that was a widow of a particular Abraham. She had used her own experience to prove that the curse only existed in the bloodline. Klein nodded. Once you become a high-sequence Beyonder, the ravings wouldn't have much of an effect on you. I hope so. Although she didn't believe she could become a high-sequence Beyonder, she believed in Mr. Fool. It was Monday again, and as soon as Klein got up, he went downstairs and saw an open sheet of paper on the coffee table in the living room. Effective. That's good. Klein immediately let out a sigh of relief. At 15 minutes to 3 in the afternoon, he promptly went above the gray fog to prepare for the new tarot club gathering.